Jack Reacher, a drifter with a buried past, stumbles into Margrave, a town hiding a deadly secret. His name's on a classified file tied to Blackthorn, a failed chemical weapons project that killed civilians and was covered up by the army. Now Senator Langston's pulling strings, Omnicorp's funding the revival of the lethal X-17, and a mysterious buyer waits. With Ellen Brandt, whose brother died for the truth, Reacher uncovers betrayal, dodges assassins, and races to expose a conspiracy that reaches DC's highest halls. In a town where everyone's a liar, Reacher's the only one who can stop a new catastrophe, or die trying. Chapter 1. Shadows of the Past. The wind howled through the empty streets of Margrave, Georgia, a small town that smelled of dust and forgotten dreams. Jack Reacher sat alone in a diner, his broad shoulders hunched over a chipped coffee mug. The place was quiet, save for the hum of a tired fan and the clink of dishes in the back. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the room out of habit. He wasn't running from anything, not tonight, but old instincts died hard. He was a big man, 6'5", built like a brick wall, with hands that could crush stone. His clothes were simple, a worn jacket, jeans and boots that had seen too many miles. Reacher didn't carry much, just a toothbrush and a wad of cash. No phone, no ID, no ties. He liked it that way. The world moved fast, but he moved faster, slipping through cracks most people didn't even see. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Rosie, refilled his coffee without asking. "You passing through?" she said, her voice soft but curious. "Always," Reacher replied, his tone low, like gravel underfoot. He didn't smile, but he nodded, a small gesture that said he wasn't trouble. Not yet. Rosie lingered, wiping the counter with a rag that had seen better days. "You got that look," she said, "like you're carrying something heavy." Reacher's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. The past was a shadow he couldn't shake, no matter how far he walked. Most days he kept it buried deep, locked away, where it couldn't touch him. But tonight something felt off. The air was too still, the silence too loud. His gut told him trouble was coming, and his gut was never wrong. He sipped his coffee, black and bitter, and let his mind drift. Margrave was just another dot on the map, a place to rest before moving on. He'd been here 2 days, long enough to know the town was hiding something. Small towns always did. Secrets festered in places like this, behind fake smiles and locked doors. Reacher didn't care much for secrets, but they had a way of finding him. The bell above the diner door jingled, snapping him back to the present. A man stepped inside, his boots heavy on the cracked linoleum. He was tall, not as tall as Reacher, but lean and wiry, with a face like a hawk. His eyes darted around the room before landing on Reacher. Something flickered in his gaze. Recognition, maybe, or something darker. The man slid into a booth across the diner, his movements careful, like he was trying not to draw attention. He ordered coffee, his voice low, and pulled a newspaper from his jacket. But Reacher noticed the way his hands moved, quick and precise, like someone trained to stay sharp. Military, maybe, or something worse. Reacher's fingers tightened around his mug. He didn't like coincidences. A stranger showing up in a nowhere town, eyeing him like he knew something. It wasn't random. He leaned back, letting his body relax while his mind stayed on edge. If this guy wanted trouble, Reacher was ready. He always was. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. Rosie disappeared into the kitchen, leaving just Reacher and the stranger in the dim light. The man hadn't touched his coffee. Instead, he kept glancing at Reacher, his fingers drumming on the table. Reacher counted the seconds, waiting for the move he knew was coming. It didn't take long. The man stood, tossed a crumpled bill on the table, and walked toward Reacher's booth. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to dodge if things went south. "You're a hard man to find," the stranger said, his voice smooth but cold, like a blade wrapped in silk. Reacher didn't move. "You found me," he said. "Now what?" The man's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "We need to talk, outside." Reacher studied him. The guy's jacket was too clean for a drifter, his posture too rigid for a civilian. He wasn't local, that was for sure. Reacher's gut screamed danger, but curiosity tugged at him. He didn't like being hunted, and this guy knew more than he was saying. "Say it here," Reacher said, his tone flat. The man's eyes narrowed. "Not safe. You know why." Reacher didn't, but he wasn't about to admit it. He stood slowly, letting his size do the talking. The stranger didn't flinch, but his hand twitched toward his jacket. Reacher clocked it. Probably a gun. Maybe a knife. He'd seen that move too many times to miss it. "Lead the way," Reacher said, his voice calm but hard. He followed the man outside, his boots crunching on the gravel lot. The night was cool, the stars hidden behind thick clouds. The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly, casting red light across the empty street. The stranger stopped near a black sedan, its engine still warm. He turned to face Reacher, his hands loose at his sides. "You don't remember me, do you?" he said. "Should I?" Reacher kept his distance, his body angled to move fast if needed. The man's face hardened. "Fort Bragg, 98, Operation Blackthorn." The words hit Reacher like a punch. Blackthorn. A name he hadn't heard in years, one he'd buried deep with the rest of his past. His mind raced, pulling up fragments, classified missions, faces he couldn't place, blood he couldn't wash off. Fort Bragg was a lifetime ago, when he was still military police, still part of the machine. Blackthorn was something else, something even the army didn't talk about. "You're mistaken," Reacher said, his voice steady despite the storm in his head. "Am I?" The man stepped closer, his eyes locked on Reacher's. "You left a mess back then. People died, good people. And now someone's digging, asking questions they shouldn't." Reacher's fists clenched. He didn't like where this was going. "Who's digging?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket. Reacher moved faster, grabbing the guy's wrist and twisting hard. A knife clattered to the ground, glinting in the neon light. The man grunted, trying to pull free, but Reacher was stronger. He slammed the guy against the sedan, pinning him with one hand. "Talk," Reacher growled. "Who sent you?" The man's eyes burned with defiance. "You can't run forever, Reacher. They know what you did. They're coming." Reacher tightened his grip. "Who?" Before the man could answer, headlights flashed across the lot. A second car, dark and sleek, roared toward them. Reacher released the stranger and spun to face the new threat. The car screeched to a stop, and two men jumped out, both armed. Their movements were sharp, professional, not locals, not amateurs. Reacher didn't wait. He dove behind the sedan as the first shot rang out, the bullet sparking off the gravel. The stranger scrambled for his knife, but Reacher was already moving. He tackled the nearest gunman, driving his shoulder into the man's gut. The guy went down hard, his pistol skidding across the lot. Reacher didn't stop. He rolled to his feet, dodging a second shot, and closed the distance to the other shooter. The fight was over in seconds. Reacher's fists were brutal, precise. The second gunman crumpled, his face a bloody mess. Reacher grabbed the dropped pistol, checking the clip. Full, standard 9mm. He turned back to the stranger, but the man was gone, vanished into the night like a ghost. The first car was empty, its driver's door open. Reacher scanned the lot, his heart pounding. The diner's lights flickered, and Rosie's face appeared at the window, wide-eyed. Reacher waved her back, signaling her to stay put. He didn't need civilians in the mix. He searched the gunman's car, finding nothing but a burner phone and a crumpled map of Margrave. The phone was locked, but the map had a single mark, a warehouse on the edge of town. Reacher memorized the location and pocketed the phone. He didn't trust cops, not in a place like this, but he wasn't stupid. Whoever these guys were, they gave us deodorant, weren't working alone. The night was quiet again, but the air felt heavy, like a storm was brewing. Reacher stood in the lot, the pistol cold in his hand, Blackthorn. The word echoed in his mind, dragging up memories he'd fought to forget. Missions gone wrong, orders he shouldn't have followed, names and faces he'd left behind. He didn't know what these men wanted, but he knew one thing. They weren't here by accident. He tossed the pistol into a storm drain and walked back to the diner. Rosie was waiting, her hands shaking as she poured him fresh coffee. "You okay?" She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Fine," Reacher said, but his mind was elsewhere. He paid for his coffee and left a tip, then stepped back into the night. Margrave wasn't just another stop anymore. It was a trap, and he'd walked right into it. The warehouse was his only lead. He'd check it out at dawn, when the light would give him an edge. For now, he needed to move, to stay ahead of whoever was hunting him. He didn't know who they were, but he'd find out. He always did. Reacher disappeared into the shadows, his boots silent on the pavement. The past was catching up, and this time he couldn't outrun it. The next morning, Reacher crouched behind a rusted dumpster, watching the warehouse from across the street. It was a squat, ugly building, its walls stained with grime and neglect. The lot was empty, but tire tracks in the dirt told him someone had been here recently. His gut said this was the place, the heart of whatever mess he'd stumbled into. He'd spent the night moving, sticking to back roads and avoiding the main streets. Margrave was small, but it had eyes, cameras, nosy locals, maybe even cops in on whatever was happening. Reacher didn't trust anyone, not until he had answers. The warehouse doors were chained, but a side window was cracked open, just enough for a man his size to slip through. He waited, listening for movement. Nothing. The air smelled of oil and metal, with a faint tang of something chemical. He didn't like it. Places like this were never empty for long. Reacher crossed the street in a low sprint, his body a blur. He pried the window open and slid inside, landing softly on a concrete floor. The warehouse was dark, lit only by slivers of sunlight creeping through broken skylights. Crates were stacked high, their labels faded but military in style, stenciled numbers, no names. He moved silently, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. A faint hum came from the back, like machinery idling. Reacher followed the sound, his senses on high alert. He passed shelves of dusty equipment, radios, cables, things that looked like they belonged in a war zone. This wasn't a storage unit. It was a staging ground. He found the source of the hum. A metal door, slightly ajar, with light spilling out. Voices came from inside, low and urgent. Reacher pressed himself against the wall, listening. 2 men, maybe 3. One voice was sharp, commanding. The other was nervous, tripping over words. "Can't just leave it," the nervous one said. "He's here, in Margrave." "Doesn't matter," the sharp voice snapped. "He's a ghost. No one's seen him in years." "Then why's he here?" the nervous one pressed. "You saw the report. Blackthorn's leaking. If he talks—" "He won't," the sharp voice cut in. "We'll handle it, like always." Reacher's blood went cold. Blackthorn again. Whatever it was big. Big enough to bring armed men to a nowhere town. Big enough to make people nervous. He edged closer, peering through the gap in the door. 3 men stood around a table, their backs to him. Maps and papers were spread out, along with a laptop glowing in the dim light. One of the men was older, his hair grey, his posture stiff. The others were younger, harder, like soldiers who'd seen too much. Reacher memorized their faces, their builds, the way they moved. He didn't know them, but he would. The older man turned, and Reacher caught a glimpse of his eyes. Cold, calculating, the kind that didn't blink when blood was spilled. This guy was in charge, no question. Reacher backed away, his mind racing. He needed more than overheard scraps. He needed proof, something solid to connect the dots. The laptop was his best bet, but taking it would mean a fight, and he wasn't ready for that. Not yet. He slipped back through the warehouse, retracing his steps. The window was still open, the street still quiet. He climbed out and dropped to the ground, his heart steady despite the adrenaline. The town was waking up now, cars humming in the distance. Reacher blended into the morning, just another drifter in a town that didn't care. But his mind was sharp, piecing together what little he knew. Blackthorn, a secret worth killing for, men who knew his name, his past, and Margrave, a town that felt more like a cage every second he stayed. He needed a plan. Step 1. Find the stranger from the diner. The guy had answers, and Reacher was good at getting people to talk. Step 2. Get to that laptop. Whatever was on it, it was the key to this mess. Step 3. Stay alive. That one was always trickier. Reacher headed toward the motel where he'd stashed his bag. It wasn't much, just a change of clothes and a few bucks, but it was enough. He didn't need much to survive. He never had. The motel was a dump, its sign half lit and buzzing. The clerk barely looked up as Reacher passed through the lobby. His room was small, the bed sagging, the air thick with mildew. He locked the door and sat on the edge of the mattress, his mind turning over the night's events. Blackthorn. He hadn't thought about it in years. But now it was everywhere, like a ghost that wouldn't stay buried. He didn't remember much, just fragments, like a dream that slipped away when you woke up. A mission, a desert, faces he couldn't name, and blood, always blood. He shook it off. Dwelling wouldn't help. He needed to move to stay one step ahead. The stranger had mentioned Fort Bragg, 98. That was a start. Reacher's memory was sharp, but the army had a way of burying things deep, even from men like him. He'd been a major back then, military police, one of the best, but Blackthorn wasn't in any report, any file. It was off the books, the kind of thing that got people erased. He checked his watch. Noon. The warehouse would be busy now, probably guarded. He'd go back tonight, when the dark would hide him. For now, he'd scout the town, look for the stranger, maybe shake some trees and see what fell out. Reacher left the motel and walked toward the center of Margrave. The streets were quiet, but he felt eyes on him. Real or imagined, he couldn't tell. He passed a hardware store, a bar, a church, with a crooked steeple. Normal places, normal people. But something was off. The air felt charged, like the moment before a fight. He stopped at a payphone, one of the last in town. He didn't trust cells, not for this. He dropped a quarter and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a voice answered, gruff and familiar. "Yeah," the voice said. "It's me," Reacher said. Silence. Then, "Hell. Where you at?" "Georgia. Small town. You remember Blackthorn?" Another pause, longer this time. "Don't go there, Jack. Let it stay dead." "Too late," Reacher said. "Someone's digging. They know me." The voice cursed softly. "You need help?" "Not yet," Reacher said. "Just answers. What was Blackthorn?" The line went quiet. Reacher waited, his grip tight on the receiver. Finally, the voice spoke, low and careful. "It was a mistake. That's all you need to know. Stay away from it." The call ended with a click. Reacher hung up, his jaw tight. A mistake. That wasn't enough. He needed more, and he'd get it one way or another. The sun was high now, burning through the morning haze. Reacher walked on, his boots kicking up dust. Margrave was small, but it was hiding something big. He'd find it. He always did. The bar was called Joe's, a dive with sticky floors and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. Reacher stepped inside, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light. It was early, but the place had a few regulars. Old men nursing beers, a couple of truckers playing pool. No sign of the stranger, but Reacher hadn't expected it to be that easy. He took a stool at the bar and ordered a coffee. The bartender, a guy with a beard and a scar across his knuckles, slid a mug over without a word. Reacher sipped it, scanning the room. Small towns talked and bars were where the talk started. If the stranger was here, someone would know. He waited, listening to the hum of conversation. Most of it was useless. Gossip about crops, football, the weather. But then he heard it. A low voice from the corner, barely audible. "Saw him last night, near the diner. Big guy, not local." Reacher's ears pricked. He didn't turn, didn't react. He just listened, letting the words come to him. "Trouble?" Another voice asked. "Dunno, but he's got that look, like he's seen things." Reacher kept his face blank, but his mind was sharp. They weren't talking about the stranger. They were talking about him. He didn't like that. Being noticed was bad enough. Being noticed in a town like this was worse. He finished his coffee and left a bill on the bar. The voices stopped as he stood, the air shifting. He felt eyes on his back as he walked out, but he didn't look back. Let them talk. He had bigger problems. The street was busier now, locals going about their day. Reacher moved through them, his size making people step aside without thinking. He was heading for the diner, hoping Rosie might know something. She'd seen the stranger, maybe even heard him say more than Reacher had. The diner was half full, the lunch crowd trickling in. Rosie was behind the counter, her smile fading when she saw Reacher. "You're back," she said, her voice tight. "Need to ask you something," Reacher said, keeping his tone soft. He didn't want to scare her, not after last night. She nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "About the guy? From the lot?" "Yeah," Reacher said. "He say anything? A name, a place?" Rosie glanced around, making sure no one was listening. "Not much. Just, he asked about you. Wanted to know if you'd been here long. I told him I didn't know you." Reacher nodded. "Anything else?" She hesitated, her eyes flickering with something like fear. "He left a card. Dropped it when he ran. I didn't give it to the cops." Reacher's pulse quickened. "Can I see it?" Rosie reached under the counter and pulled out a small creased business card. It was plain, white, with no logo. Just a name, John Kessler, and a number. Reacher memorized it and handed the card back. "Thanks," he said. "Keep this quiet." She nodded, her hands trembling slightly. "You in trouble?" "Not yet," Reacher said, but he wasn't sure. Kessler. The name didn't ring a bell, but it was a start. He left the diner and headed for the payphone again. Time to shake the tree. A little harder. He dialed the number from the card. It rang once, twice, then a voice answered, cold and professional. "Kessler." Reacher didn't hesitate. "You're looking for me," he said. "Why?" Silence. Then, "Reacher, you're faster than I thought." "Talk," Reacher said. "What's Blackthorn?" Kessler laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You really don't remember, do you? That's probably for the best. Stay out of it, Reacher. Walk away." "Not my style," Reacher said. "You sent men after me. That was a mistake." "They weren't mine," Kessler said, his voice tightening. "But you're right. It was a mistake. You won't see them again." "Who's pulling the strings?" Reacher pressed. Kessler didn't answer. The line went dead. Reacher slammed the receiver down, his jaw tight. Kessler knew more than he was saying, and he wasn't working alone. Reacher needed to find him, and fast. The day was slipping away, the sun dipping low. Reacher headed back to the motel, his mind turning over the pieces. Blackthorn, Kessler, the warehouse, Margrave. It was all connected, and he was caught in the middle. He didn't like it, but he wasn't running. Not yet. Night fell fast, the town sinking into darkness. Reacher waited until the streets were empty before heading back to the warehouse. He moved like a shadow, sticking to alleys and backlots. The warehouse loomed ahead, its windows dark but not empty. He could feel it. Someone was inside. He circled the building, checking for guards. Nothing. Either they were sloppy, or they wanted him to come. He didn't like either option, but he wasn't turning back. He climbed through the same window, landing silently. The warehouse was different now, the air thicker, the hum louder. Something was happening. He moved toward the metal door, his steps careful. The voices were back, but different. More of them, more urgent. He crouched low, peering through the gap. The room was packed, at least a dozen men, all armed. The older man from before stood at the head of the table, his voice sharp as he barked orders. "Doesn't matter if he's here," the man said. "We move tonight. The shipment can't wait." Shipment. Reacher's mind locked onto the word. Drugs, weapons, something worse. It didn't matter. Whatever it was tied to Blackthorn, and it was big. He backed away, his heart steady. He couldn't take them all, not without a plan. But he could watch, wait, find the right moment. He slipped out of the warehouse and found a spot across the street, hidden in the shadows. The night was long, and he was patient. Hours passed. Just before dawn, a truck rolled into the lot, its headlights off. Men poured out of the warehouse, loading crates into the back. Reacher watched, memorizing faces, numbers, details. The older man was there, overseeing it all. Kessler wasn't, but Reacher hadn't expected him to be. Guys like Kessler stayed clean, let others do the dirty work. The truck pulled out, and the warehouse went quiet. Reacher waited until the lot was empty, then crossed the street. The window was still open, the warehouse still dark. He climbed. Inside, his mind set. The laptop was his target. Whatever was on it, it would tell him what Blackthorn was and why someone wanted him dead. He found the metal door unlocked, the room empty. The laptop was gone, but papers were scattered across the table. He scanned them, maps, schedules, names. One caught his eye. Fort Bragg, 1998, Blackthorn, and a single word underlined in red, Reacher. His blood went cold. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew one thing. The past wasn't just catching up. It was here, and it wasn't letting go. Reacher pocketed the paper and slipped out of the warehouse. Dawn was breaking, the sky grey and heavy. Margrave was awake, but he was already moving, a ghost in a town that didn't know him. Kessler was out there, and so were the answers. Reacher would find them. He always did. Chapter 2. The Classified Files. The morning sun burned low over Margrave, painting the streets in a dull gold. Jack Reacher moved fast, his boots silent on the cracked pavement. The paper he'd taken from the warehouse was tucked inside his jacket, its weight heavier than it should have been. His name, underlined in red, next to Blackthorn and Fort Bragg, 1998. It wasn't just a clue. It was a warning. Someone knew his past, and they were playing a dangerous game. Reacher didn't like games. He liked answers, and he'd tear this town apart to get them. The stranger from the diner, Kessler, knew more than he'd let on. The phone call had been a dead end, but Reacher wasn't done with him. Men like Kessler didn't vanish. They hid, and Reacher was good at finding what was hidden. He headed for the edge of town, where the motels and gas stations gave way to empty fields and rusted trailers. Margrave was small, but it had layers. places where secrets could fester. If Kessler was still here, he'd be in one of those layers, somewhere off the grid. Reacher's plan was simple. Find him, make him talk, and figure out what Blackthorn was before more men with guns showed up. The payphone from yesterday was still there, its metal dented but working. Reacher dropped a quarter and dialed the number from Kessler's card again. It rang once, then went to a dead tone. He slammed the receiver down, his jaw tight. Kessler was smart, too smart to keep the same number active. But smart men made mistakes, and Reacher would be there when he did. He walked on, his eyes scanning every car, every face. Margrave felt different today, like the town itself was watching him. He didn't believe in hunches, but his gut was screaming. Trouble was close, and it wasn't just Kessler. The warehouse, the truck, the armed men. It was all part of something bigger, something tied to his past. Reacher didn't remember Blackthorn, not clearly, but the fragments were enough to make his skin crawl. A mission, a desert, blood. And now, his name on a paper in a town he'd never meant to stay in. He stopped at a gas station, its pumps old and rusted. The clerk inside was a kid, barely 20, with a bored look and a comic book in his hands. Reacher bought a coffee and leaned against the counter, keeping his tone casual. You see a guy around here, tall, lean, looks like he doesn't belong. The kid shrugged, not looking up. Lots of guys like that. Truckers mostly. This one's different, Reacher said. Carries himself like he's ready for a fight. Might have been here last night. The kid glanced up, his eyes narrowing. Maybe. Some dude came in late, bought a burner phone, didn't talk much, had a scar on his hand. Reacher's pulse quickened. A scar. He hadn't noticed one on Kessler, but it fit. Men like him collected marks, reminders of fights they'd walked away from. He say where he was going? Reacher asked. Nope, paid cash and left. The kid went back to his comic, done talking. Reacher sipped his coffee, his mind turning. A burner phone meant Kessler was staying off the radar, but he'd slipped up by coming here. The gas station had a camera, a cheap one bolted above the door. Reacher didn't trust tech, but he knew its value. He nodded at the kid. Can I see the tapes? The kid laughed. You a cop or something? Or something, Reacher said, his voice low but firm. He slid a 20 across the counter. The kid pocketed the cash and jerked his thumb toward a back room. Knock yourself out. System's old, though. Half the time it doesn't record. Reacher stepped into the cramped room, the air thick with dust and cigarette smoke. The security setup was a joke, a grainy monitor hooked to a VCR that looked older than the kid. He rewound the tape, watching the night's footage flicker by in black and white. At 2:17 a.m., a man appeared. Tall, lean, moving like a predator. His face was blurry, but the scar on his hand was clear as he handed over cash. Kessler. Reacher froze the frame, memorizing the details. Kessler had been driving a dark sedan, the same one from the diner lot. The tape didn't show a license plate, but it was enough. Kessler was still in Margrave, and he wasn't far. Reacher left the gas station and headed for the motel where he'd stashed his bag. The clerk didn't look up as he passed through the lobby, which was fine by Reacher. He didn't need attention, not now. His room was untouched, the bed still sagging, the air still sour. He sat on the mattress and pulled out the paper from the warehouse. The words stared back at him. Fort Bragg, 1998. Blackthorn. Reacher. He folded it and tucked it back into his jacket. The past was a puzzle, and this was just one piece. He needed more, and Kessler was the key. But Kessler wasn't the only player. The men at the warehouse, the older guy with the cold eyes, they were part of it too. And then there was the shipment, whatever it was. Reacher didn't care about the details, not yet. He just needed to know why his name was in the mix. The motel phone rang, sharp and sudden. Reacher froze, his hand hovering over the receiver. No one knew he was here. He picked it up, staying silent. "Reacher," a voice said, low and smooth. "Kessler." "You're digging in the wrong place." Reacher's grip tightened. "Then point me to the right one." Kessler laughed, the sound dry and cold. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about you, not yet. Walk away, and maybe you stay alive." "Not my style," Reacher said. "You sent men to kill me. That's personal." "They weren't mine," Kessler said, echoing his words from the payphone. "But you're right. They shouldn't have come for you. That was premature." Reacher's jaw clenched. "Who's calling the shots?" Silence. Then, "You'll find out soon enough. Check the library, Reacher. 3rd floor, history section. You'll see." The line went dead. Reacher hung up, his mind racing. The library. A public place, easy to watch, hard to hide. It screamed trap, but Reacher didn't care. Traps worked both ways, and he was good at turning them around. He left the motel and headed for the centre of town. Margrave's library was a small brick building, its windows dusty and its sign faded. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, which made it perfect for whatever Kessler was planning. Reacher didn't trust him, but he trusted his own instincts. If there was something in that library, he'd find it. The library was quiet, the air thick with the smell of old books. A librarian, an older woman with glasses and a tight bun, glanced up as Reacher entered. He nodded, keeping his face neutral, and headed for the stairs. The 3rd floor was deserted, just rows of shelves packed with books no one read any more. The history section was in the back, tucked against a window that overlooked the street. Reacher moved slowly, his eyes scanning for anything out of place. The shelves were crammed with dusty volumes, Civil War, World War II, local history. Nothing stood out, but Kessler's words echoed in his head. "You'll see." He ran his fingers along the spines, checking for anything loose or hidden. Then he found it. A book, thicker than the rest, its cover worn but not dusty. Military Records, Fort Bragg, 1990-2000. Reacher pulled it down, his heart steady, but his senses sharp. He opened it, flipping through pages of dry reports, training logs, personnel lists, nothing special. But halfway through, a single page was marked with a red tab. He turned to it and his breath caught. It was a file typed and faded but clear enough. Operation Blackthorn. Classified. Authorized personnel only. Below it, a list of names. Most were redacted, blacked out with heavy ink. But one stood out, unredacted, in bold. Major Jack Reacher, Military Police. Reacher stared at the page, his mind pulling up fragments he didn't want. A desert. A mission. Orders he hadn't questioned, not then. He didn't remember the details, but the weight of it was there, heavy and cold. He'd been part of something the army had buried deep, and now someone was digging it up. He tore the page out and tucked it into his jacket. The book went back on the shelf, exactly as he'd found it. He didn't know who'd left it. Kessler maybe, or someone else. But it wasn't random. They wanted him to see this, to know his name was tied to Blackthorn. The question was why. He headed for the stairs, his boots quiet on the worn carpet. The librarian was still at her desk, her eyes on a crossword puzzle. Reacher passed her without a word and stepped outside. The street was busy now, locals heading to lunch, cars crawling by. He felt exposed like a target painted on his back. Kessler's trap hadn't sprung, but that didn't mean it wasn't there. Reacher walked, his mind turning over the file. Operation Blackthorn. Classified off the books, tied to Fort Bragg. He'd been a major in '98, one of the Army's best. But Blackthorn wasn't in any report he'd ever seen. It was a ghost, just like him, and ghosts didn't come back unless someone called them. He needed more. The library was a start, but it wasn't enough. Kessler was still out there, and so was the older man from the warehouse. They had answers, and Reacher would get them, one way or another. He headed for the diner, hoping Rosie might have seen something new. Small towns talked, and she was his best shot at hearing it. The diner was packed, the lunch rush in full swing. Rosie was behind the counter, her hands moving fast as she poured coffee and slid plates to customers. She spotted Reacher and nodded toward a corner booth, the only empty one. He took it, his back to the wall, his eyes on the door. Rosie came over with a fresh pot, her face tight. "You're trouble, aren't you?" she said, keeping her voice low. "Only for the right people," Reacher said. "You hear anything? About the guy from last night?" She glanced around, making sure no one was listening. "Not him. But some folks were talking this morning. Said there's been strangers in town, not just you. Men in suits, driving fancy cars. They've been asking questions." "About me?" Reacher asked. "About a lot of things," Rosie said. "Old army stuff. Something called Blackthorn. I didn't catch much, but it sounded serious." Reacher's jaw tightened. Blackthorn again. It was spreading, like a stain he couldn't scrub out. "Thanks," he said, sliding her a tip. "Keep your ears open." She nodded and moved on, her apron swinging as she worked the counter. Reacher sipped his coffee, his mind sharp. Men in suits. That meant money, power, maybe government. Blackthorn wasn't just a mission. It was a secret someone was desperate to keep. And now they were here, in Margrave, circling him like sharks. He left the diner and headed for the warehouse again. It was a risk, going back in daylight, but he didn't have time to wait. The truck from last night, the shipment, it was all tied to the file, to his name. He needed to know what they were moving and why it was worth killing for. The warehouse was quiet, its lot empty. Reacher circled it, checking for cameras, guards, anything. Nothing. Either they were sloppy, or they'd cleared out. He didn't like either option. He slipped through the same window, landing softly inside. The air was still, the hum from last night gone. The crates were still there, but fewer now, like some had been moved. He moved toward the metal door, his senses on edge. It was locked this time, a heavy padlock glinting in the dim light. Reacher didn't bother with it. Locks were a problem for other people. He checked the crates instead, prying one open with a crowbar he found nearby. Inside were metal cases, military-grade, sealed tight. He cracked one open, and his blood went cold. Weapons. Not standard issue. Prototype stuff, sleek and deadly. Rifles, pistols, things he didn't recognize. And something else. A small sealed canister, marked with a hazard symbol he knew too. Well, chemical. Not good. Reacher closed the case and stepped back. Blackthorn wasn't just a mission. It was a project. Something the army, or someone else, had kept buried. Weapons, chemicals, and his name tied to it all. He didn't know how, but he'd find out. A noise snapped him back, a boot scuffing concrete. He spun, his body low, ready to move. A shadow moved in the dark. Then another. 2 men, armed, closing in. Reacher didn't wait. He dove behind a crate as the first shot rang out, the bullets sparking off the floor. The fight was fast and brutal. Reacher moved like a machine, his fists and boots finding targets before the men could react. The first went down with a broken jaw, the second with a knee that wouldn't work again. Reacher didn't kill them. He didn't need to. They'd talk, eventually, but not here. He dragged them to a corner, binding their hands with cable ties from a nearby shelf. They were out cold, but they'd wake up soon. Reacher didn't have time to wait. He grabbed a rifle from the crate, checked its clip, and tucked it under his jacket. He didn't like guns, but he wasn't stupid. Whatever Blackthorn was, it was worth more than a fistfight. He slipped out of the warehouse, the rifle heavy against his side. The town was alive now, but he moved through it like a ghost, sticking to shadows and back streets. Kessler was still out there, and so were the men in suits. The file, the weapons, the canister, it was all coming together, but the picture was still blurry. Reacher needed a safe place to think, to plan. The motel was burned. Too many eyes now. He headed for the outskirts, where the fields stretched, wide and empty. There was an old barn he'd seen yesterday, half collapsed but hidden. It would do for now. The barn smelled of rot and hay, its walls creaking in the wind. Reacher settled in a corner, the rifle across his lap. He pulled out the file page and read it again, his eyes tracing the words. Operation Blackthorn, classified. His name, bold and unredacted. The fragments in his mind were sharper now. A desert, a base, a mission that felt wrong even then. He'd followed orders, like always, but something had gone bad, bad enough to bury it. He leaned back, his eyes on the horizon. Margrave wasn't just a trap anymore. It was a battlefield, and he was in the middle. Kessler, the suits, the warehouse, they were all pieces of a puzzle he didn't understand. But he would. He always did. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the fields. Reacher closed his eyes, letting his body rest while his mind stayed sharp. The fight was coming, and he'd be ready. Blackthorn was his past, and now it was his fight. He'd tear it open, no matter what it took. Chapter 3. A Name Erased. The barn's shadows grew long as the sun sank, painting the fields outside in shades of grey. Jack Reacher sat still, the stolen rifle across his knees, its cold metal a reminder of the mess he was in. The file page from the library was in his hand, its words burned into his mind. Operation Blackthorn. Classified. Major Jack Reacher. His name, tied to something he couldn't fully remember. Something the army had buried deep, but someone was digging, and they weren't being subtle about it. Reacher didn't like being a target. He'd spent years as a ghost, moving through towns like Margrave without leaving a trace. No phone, no address, no ties, just a toothbrush and enough cash to keep going. But now his past was catching up, and it wasn't just Kessler or the men in suits. The weapons in the warehouse, the chemical canister, they pointed to something bigger, something that made his gut twist. Blackthorn wasn't just a mission. It was a secret worth killing for, and his name was at the center. He folded the page and tucked it into his jacket. The barn was quiet, but his senses were sharp, picking up every creak of wood, every rustle of wind. He didn't trust the silence. Margrave was small, but it was crawling with trouble. Armed men, strangers asking questions, and now a file that shouldn't exist. Reacher needed answers, and he needed them fast. His first move was Kessler. The guy was slippery, but he'd slipped up twice, once at the diner, once at the gas station. Reacher knew he'd do it again. Men like Kessler couldn't help it. They thought they were untouchable, but no one was, not when Reacher was hunting. The problem was time. The warehouse shipment was gone, and the men in suits were closing in. Reacher could feel the noose tightening, and he didn't like it. He stood, slinging the rifle over his shoulder. The barn was a good hideout, but he couldn't stay. Staying still was death in a game like this. He needed to shake things up, make Kessler or whoever was pulling the strings show their hand. The library file was a start, but it wasn't enough. He needed more, something solid, something that would crack Blackthorn open. Reacher stepped outside, the night air cool and sharp. The fields stretched wide, empty, except for the faint glow of Margrave in the distance. He moved fast, sticking to the tree line, his boots silent on the soft earth. His plan was simple: hit the town, find Kessler's trail, and follow it. If that meant breaking a few things, or a few people, so be it. The gas station was his first stop. The kid from earlier might have seen more, or maybe Kessler had come back. Reacher didn't expect much, but small leads were better than none. The station was lit up, its pumps casting long shadows across the lot. The same kid was behind the counter, his comic book swapped for a soda can. He looked up as Reacher walked in, his eyes widening slightly. "You again," the kid said, his voice wary. "What now?" "The guy with the scar," Reacher said, keeping his tone even. "He come back?" The kid shook his head, but his eyes flicked toward the back room. Reacher caught it, a tell as clear as day. "Don't lie," he said, stepping closer. "I'm not in the mood." The kid swallowed, his hands fidgeting. "Okay, yeah, he was here. Couple hours ago. Bought another burner phone. Didn't say much." "Where'd he go?" Reacher asked. "Dunno. He was in a hurry, though. Kept looking out the window, like he was expecting someone." Reacher nodded. Kessler was nervous, which meant he was close to breaking. "Show me the tape." The kid didn't argue this time. He led Reacher to the back room, the same dusty setup as before. The VCR whirred as the kid rewound the tape. At 4:53 p.m., Kessler appeared. his face clearer this time. The scar on his hand was visible, a jagged line across his knuckles. He paid for the phone and left, glancing over his shoulder as he stepped into the lot. The tape caught his car, a DU, dark sedan same as before. But this time, Reacher saw the plate. Georgia tags, partial number 7KX. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Thanks," Reacher said, tossing the kid another 20. "Keep this quiet." The kid nodded, his eyes on the cash. Reacher left the station, his mind turning over the new lead. A plate number could narrow things down. But Margrave wasn't the kind of town where you walked into a DMV and asked questions. He needed another angle, someone who knew the town's underbelly. Rosie was his best bet. She'd heard talk about Blackthorn, and diner waitresses always knew more than they let on. The diner was quieter now, the lunch crowd gone. Rosie was wiping down tables, her face tired but alert. She straightened when she saw Reacher, her eyes searching his. "You're still here," she said, her voice low. "Thought you'd be long gone after last night." "Not yet," Reacher said, sliding into a booth. "Need your help." Rosie glanced around, then sat across from him, keeping her voice down. "You're gonna get me in trouble, aren't you?" "Only if you talk too loud," Reacher said, his tone soft but firm. "The guy from the diner, Kessler, he's driving a dark sedan, Georgia plates, starts with 7KX. You see it around?" Rosie's brow furrowed. "Maybe. There's been a few cars like that, parked near the old mill. Not locals. I figured they were just passing through." "The mill," Reacher said, his mind locking onto the detail. "Where is it?" "Edge of town, past the tracks. Been shut down for years. Kids go there to drink, but lately there's been activity. Trucks, men, that kind of thing." Reacher nodded. The mill sounded like a hub, maybe tied to the warehouse. "Thanks, Rosie. You hear anything else about Blackthorn, you let me know." Her eyes widened slightly. "That word again. What is it?" "Trouble," Reacher said, standing. "Stay clear of it." He left the diner, his steps quick. The mill was his next move, but he needed to be smart. Kessler was slippery, and the men in suits were still out there. Reacher didn't know who they were, government, private or something. Worse, but they were hunting him, and they weren't amateurs. The mill was a mile out, a crumbling relic of Margrave's better days. Reacher approached on foot, sticking to the shadows of the train tracks. The night was clear, the stars sharp above. He could smell the river nearby, its damp scent mixing with the rust and decay of the mill. The building loomed ahead, its walls sagging, its windows black. But there was light, faint, flickering coming from inside. Reacher crouched low, moving closer. Tire tracks crisscrossed the dirt lot, fresh and deep. A sedan was parked near the entrance, its plates obscured by mud. Reacher memorized its shape, its color, dark, like Kessler's. He didn't see movement, but his gut told him the place wasn't empty. He circled the mill, checking for exits, guards, cameras. Nothing obvious, but that didn't mean it was safe. He found a broken window and slipped inside, landing softly on a concrete floor littered with glass and debris. The air was thick with dust, the smell of oil and metal heavy. He moved silently, his eyes adjusting to the dark. The light came from a back room, its door cracked open. Voices drifted out, low and tense. Reacher pressed himself against the wall, listening. 2 men, one familiar, Kessler. The other was older, his voice rough, like he'd smoked too many cigarettes. "Can't keep this quiet," Kessler was saying. "Reacher's here. He's already been to the warehouse." "Then we move faster," the older man said. "The shipment's out, but the files are still here. If he gets them, it's over." Reacher's pulse quickened. Files. More than the one he'd found. He edged closer, peering through the gap. Kessler stood near a table, his scar visible in the dim light. The older man was facing away, his back to the door. Papers were scattered across the table, along with a laptop and a stack of folders marked classified. "He doesn't remember," Kessler said, his voice sharp. "That's our edge. But he's not stupid. He'll piece it together." "Then we erase him," the older man said, his tone flat. "Like we erased the others." Reacher's jaw tightened. Erase! The word hit hard, dragging up memories he couldn't place. Faces, names, gone like smoke. He didn't know what Blackthorn was, but he knew one thing. He wasn't getting erased, not today. He backed away, his mind racing. The files were his target, but taking them now would mean a fight, and he didn't know how many men were in the mill. He needed a diversion, something to scatter them. He scanned the room, spotting a stack of old crates near the wall. Flammable, probably. Perfect. Reacher moved fast, pulling a lighter from his pocket, a cheap one he'd picked up at the gas station. He tore some papers from a nearby crate and set them alight, tossing them into the stack. The flames caught quick, smoke curling up. He slipped back into the shadows as the fire spread, the crackle loud in the quiet. Shouts came from the back room. Kessler and the older man burst out, coughing, their eyes wide. 2 more men followed, armed with pistols. Reacher stayed low, watching as they scrambled to put out the fire. The diversion wouldn't last long, but it was enough. He moved to the table, grabbing the stack of folders. They were heavy, marked with codes he didn't recognize. He tucked them under his jacket and headed for the window, his steps silent. The smoke was thick now, the fire spreading faster than he'd expected. He climbed out and dropped to the ground, the folders secure. The mill was chaos behind him, men shouting, the fire's glow lighting up the night. Reacher didn't look back. He ran, sticking to the tracks, the folders a dead weight against his chest. He didn't know what was in them, but he knew one thing. They were the key to Blackthorn, and maybe to why his name was a target. He found a spot in the woods, a clearing hidden by pines. The folders were old, their edges worn, but the contents were intact. He opened the first one, his eyes scanning the pages. Reports, memos, names, most redacted, but a few clear. Fort Bragg, 1998. Operation Blackthorn. Chemical trials. Unauthorized deployment. And there again, his name, Major Jack Reacher. Reacher's blood went cold. Chemical trials. That explained the canister in the warehouse. Whatever Blackthorn was, it wasn't just a mission. It was an experiment. Something the army, or someone else, had tested in secret. And he'd been part of it, willingly or not. He flipped through the pages, his mind pulling up fragments. A desert base, far from prying eyes. Orders he'd followed, thinking they were clean. But something had gone wrong. People had died, maybe more than they'd meant to. The files didn't say, but the redactions told their own story. Someone had worked hard to bury this, to erase it, and now they were erasing anyone tied to it. Reacher closed the folder, his jaw tight. Kessler knew his role, and so did the older man. They weren't just covering tracks, they were cleaning house. Reacher was a loose end, and loose ends got cut. He stood, the folders tucked under his arm. The mill was still burning, its light faint in the distance. Kessler would know he'd been there, but Reacher didn't care. Let them come. He'd be ready. His next move was clear. Find a safe place to read the files, piece together what Blackthorn was and why it was worth killing for. The barn was too exposed now. He needed somewhere new, somewhere no one would look. Margrave was running out of hiding spots, but Reacher was good at finding them. He moved through the woods, the night his cover. The folders were heavy, but their weight felt right. They were proof, something solid in a world of shadows. Kessler was out there, and so were the men in suits. They thought they could erase him, but they were wrong. Reacher didn't erase. He fought. The stars were bright above, the air cold. Reacher kept moving, his mind sharp, his body ready. Blackthorn was his past, and now it was his war. He'd win it, like he always did. Chapter 4. The Ghost of West Point. The woods outside Margrave were dark, the kind of dark that swallowed sound and light. Jack Reacher moved through them like a shadow, the stolen folders tucked tight under his jacket. His boots sank into the soft earth, but he made no noise. The weight of the files was more than physical. Every page was a piece of his past, a past he didn't fully remember but couldn't escape. Operation Blackthorn, chemical trials, Major Jack Reacher. The words burned in his mind, sharp and heavy, like a wound that wouldn't close. He needed a place to hole up, somewhere safe to read the files and figure out what Blackthorn was before Kessler or the men in suits found him. Margrave was closing in, its streets too small, its eyes too sharp. Reacher didn't trust anyone. Not the cops, not the locals, not even Rosie, though she'd helped him more than she had to. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, not when his name was tied to a secret someone was killing to keep. The folders mentioned West Point, a detail that hit harder than the rest. Reacher had graduated from the academy in '84, a lifetime ago. He'd been young, sharp, the kind of cadet who didn't bend, didn't break. West Point had shaped him, but it hadn't owned him. The files hinted at something else. Meetings at the academy, names tied to Blackthorn, names he didn't recognize, but felt familiar, like ghosts whispering in the dark. If West Point was part of this, he needed to know how. Reacher found a spot, deep in the woods, a hollow where the trees grew thick and the ground was dry. He crouched low, checking for signs of pursuit. Broken branches, footprints, anything. Nothing. The night was still, the only sound the faint rustle of leaves. He sat against a tree, the folders in his lap, and opened the first one. The pages were old, their edges brittle, but the words were clear. Reports, coded and clipped, described Blackthorn as a special project run out of Fort Bragg in '98. Chemical trials, off the books, with ties to West Point's research arm. Reacher's name appeared twice, once as a participant, once as a witness. Witness to what? He didn't know, but the word felt wrong, like a lie. He flipped to another page, a memo dated June 98. It mentioned a meeting at West Point, a classified briefing with select personnel. No names, just initials, but one stood out, J.R. Reacher's initials. His gut twisted. He'd been at Bragg in 98, not West Point, but the army moved men like chess pieces. Had he been there? Had he sat in a room, listening to plans he didn't understand? The memory was gone, or buried so deep he couldn't reach it. He closed the folder, his jaw tight. The files were a map, but half the roads were missing. He needed more. Names, dates, something to connect the dots. Kessler was his best lead, but Kessler was a snake, slithering through Margrave's cracks. The men in suits were another problem. Rosie had said they were asking about Blackthorn, which meant they weren't locals. Government, maybe, or private contractors with deep pockets. Either way, they were hunting him, and they weren't stopping. Reacher stood, tucking the folders back under his jacket. The woods were safe for now, but he couldn't stay. Dawn was hours away, and he needed to move, to keep the hunters off balance. His next stop was the old mill. The fire he'd set had scattered Kessler's crew, but they'd be back, and they might have left something behind. Papers, clues, anything to fill in the blanks. He moved through the woods, his senses sharp. The mill was a mile off, its silhouette faint against the night sky. The air smelled of smoke, a reminder of the chaos he'd caused. Reacher didn't feel bad about it. Chaos was his friend, a tool to shake things loose. He approached the mill from the south, sticking to the riverbank where the shadows were deepest. The building was quiet, its windows dark, but tire tracks in the mud told him someone had been here since the fire. He circled the mill, checking for guards. Nothing, but the air felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. He slipped inside through a broken door, the smell of charred wood strong. The fire hadn't spread far, mostly crates and debris, but the back room was intact, its door still cracked open. Reacher moved silently, his eyes scanning for anything useful. The table was empty, the laptop and papers gone. Kessler's crew had cleaned up fast, but they weren't perfect. Reacher spotted a single sheet under the table, crumpled and singed. He picked it up, smoothing it out. It was a roster, partial, with names and ranks. Most were redacted, but one wasn't. Colonel Elias Vance, West Point, 1998. The name hit like a punch. Vance. Reacher didn't know him, but the West Point connection was too clean to be chance. Vance was part of Blackthorn, and maybe the older man from the warehouse. Reacher pocketed the roster and searched the room. Nothing else, just ash and broken glass. He didn't like it. The mill was too quiet, too clean. Kessler's crew wasn't. Sloppy. They'd left the roster on purpose, a breadcrumb to lead him somewhere. Reacher didn't trust traps, but he didn't have a choice. Vance was a name, and names were power. He slipped out of the mill, the roster burning a hole in his pocket. The night was colder now, the stars hidden by clouds. Margrave was waking up soon, and he needed to be gone before the town started talking. The diner was his next stop. Rosie might have heard more, and she was the only one he halfway trusted. Halfway was as close as he got. The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly as Reacher approached. It was closed, but a light was on inside, and Rosie's silhouette moved behind the counter. He tapped the glass, keeping his face neutral. She looked up, startled, then unlocked the door. "You don't sleep, do you?" she said, her voice tired but sharp. "Not much," Reacher said, stepping inside. The diner smelled of coffee and grease, familiar and grounding. "You hear anything new? About the suits or a name? Vance?" Rosie's eyes narrowed. "Vance? Yeah, I heard it. Some guy at the bar was talking, said a Colonel Vance used to come through Margrave years ago. Army type, big shot. Nobody's seen him in a while, but his name's been floating around lately." "Floating how?" Reacher asked, his tone low. "Whispers," Rosie said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Folks saying he's back, or someone's asking about him. Same as they're asking about you." Reacher nodded, his mind turning. Vance was a ghost, just like him. But ghosts left traces. If he was tied to Blackthorn, he'd been at West Point in '98, maybe at that briefing. Reacher needed to know more, but Margrave's gossip only went so far. He needed someone with access, someone who could dig into army records without tripping alarms. "Thanks," Reacher said, sliding her a bill. "You see Kessler or those suits, you don't know me." Rosie nodded, her face tight. "Be careful. This town's got a bad feeling." Reacher left the diner, the night closing around him. Rosie was right. Margrave felt wrong, like a trap snapping shut. He needed to move, to find Vance or Kessler before they found him. The roster and the files were his only leads, but they pointed to West Point, and West Point was a long way from Georgia. He headed for the payphone, the same dented one he'd used before. He dropped a quarter and dialed a number he hadn't called in years, a contact from his army days, a man who owed him and knew how to keep his mouth shut. The line rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Who's this?" the voice said. "Reacher," he said, keeping it short. "Need a favor?" The voice cursed softly. "You got a knack for trouble, Jack. What is it?" "West Point, '98. Colonel Elias Vance. Dig up what you can, quiet-like, and anything on a project called Blackthorn." Silence. Then, "Blackthorn? You sure you want to go there?" "No choice," Reacher said. "Someone's hunting me. I need to know why." The voice sighed. "Give me a day. I'll call you back. Where you at?" "Payphone," Reacher said, giving the number. "Don't screw me over." "Wouldn't dream of it," the voice said, and the line went dead. Reacher hung up, his jaw tight. He didn't like waiting, but he didn't have a choice. His contact was good, one of the few Reacher trusted to get answers without selling him out. For now, he needed to stay low, keep moving, and watch his back. Headed for the woods again, a different spot this time, farther from the mill. The folders and roster were still with him, their weight a constant reminder. He found a clearing, hidden by thick brush, and settled in. The files were his focus. Now, he opened them again, reading by the faint light of a pen flashlight he'd taken from the mill. The pages were dense, coded in army jargon, but pieces stood out. Blackthorn was a joint project. Fort Bragg for ops, West Point for research. Chemical, weapons, experimental, designed for targeted deployment. The trials had gone wrong, though the files didn't say how. Casualties were mentioned, redacted names, but the numbers were high. Too high for a test. Reacher's name appeared again. tied to a debrief at West Point. He didn't remember it, but the date matched. July 98. He closed the file, his mind heavy. West Point. He'd been there, maybe not for long, but long enough to get tangled in Blackthorn. Vance was the key. His name, his rank, his connection to the academy. If Reacher could find him, or what he'd done, the puzzle might snap together. The night was quiet, but Reacher didn't relax. He leaned against a tree, the rifle close, his eyes on the dark. Kessler was out there, and so were the suits. They knew he had the files, or they'd guess soon enough. The mill fire would have tipped them off, and Margrave wasn't big enough to hide in forever. He thought about West Point, the academy's stone walls, its code of duty. He'd believed in it once, before the army showed its other face. Secrets, lies, missions that left good men dead. Blackthorn was part of that face, and he'd been part of it too. The thought made his fists clench. He didn't like being used, and he didn't like being hunted. Dawn was close, the sky turning grey. Reacher stood, stretching his legs. He'd head back to the payphone at noon, wait for his contact's call. Until then, he'd scout the town, look for signs of Kessler or the suits. Margrave was a cage, but cages had weak spots, and Reacher was good at finding them. He moved through the woods, the folders secure, the rifle hidden under his jacket. The past was a ghost, and it was haunting him. But Reacher wasn't afraid of ghosts. He'd face them, break them, and walk away. Blackthorn was his fight now, and he'd finish it, no matter the cost. Chapter 5. Blood on the Badge. The morning air was thick with mist, clinging to the trees as Jack Reacher slipped through the woods outside Margrave. The folders under his jacket were a heavy burden, their secrets sharper than any blade. Bushion, Blackthorn, chemical trials, West Point, Colonel Elias Vance. His name tied to it all, a thread in a web he didn't understand but couldn't ignore. Reacher wasn't a man who ran from trouble, but trouble was finding him faster than he liked. He'd been a ghost for years, drifting through towns with no trace, no past. But Blackthorn was dragging that past into the light, and it wasn't pretty. The files hinted at a project gone wrong. Chemical weapons, dead soldiers, a cover-up that reached high. Reacher's role was murky, but his name was clear, and someone wanted it erased. Kessler, the suits, maybe Vance. They were all part of it, and Margrave was their battlefield. Reacher's plan was simple. Stay alive, find answers, and break whoever was hunting him. The payphone call from his army contact was his next move, but noon was hours away, and he couldn't sit still. Margrave was too small, too watched. The mill fire had stirred the hornet's nest, and Kessler's crew would be looking for him. The suits, too. Reacher needed to move, to keep them guessing. He headed for the town's edge, where the streets turned to dirt, and the houses sagged under years of neglect. The rifle was still with him, hidden under his jacket, its weight a grim comfort. He didn't like guns, but he wasn't stupid. Blackthorn was bigger than fists, and he'd need every edge. His first stop was a bar on the outskirts, a dive called Rusty's, with a neon sign that flickered like it was on its last legs. Bars were where secrets spilled, especially in a town like this. If Kessler or the suits were moving, someone here might have seen them. Reacher stepped inside, the air heavy with smoke and stale beer. It was early, but the place had a few regulars, truckers, locals, men with nowhere else to go. He took a stool at the counter, ordering a coffee from a bartender with a lazy eye and a scowl. The guy slid a chipped mug over without a word. Reacher sipped it, his eyes scanning the room. The regulars kept to themselves, but their talk was loud, sloppy. He listened, filtering out the noise. Complaints about work, wives the usual. Then he caught it, a low voice from a corner booth. "Seen 'em by the tracks," the voice said, rough and slurred. "Suits like city folk. Asking about some. Army guy. Big fella, not local." Reacher didn't turn, didn't react. He let the words sink in, his mind sharp. The suits were digging, and they were bold, asking questions in a town where strangers stood out. He sipped his coffee, waiting. For more? "Trouble, you think?" another voice asked, quieter. "Always is," the first said. "Heard they mentioned a name. Reacher, something like that." Reacher's jaw tightened. His name was out, spreading like a stain. He didn't like it. Being known was bad enough. Being known in Margrave was worse. He finished his coffee and left a bill, his movements calm but deliberate. The bartender didn't look up as he left, which was fine. Reacher didn't need eyes on him. Outside, the mist was lifting, the sun cutting through in weak patches. Reacher headed for the tracks, where the suits had been spotted. It was a risk, walking into their territory, but he didn't have a choice. The files were a start, but they weren't enough. He needed to know who these men were, what they wanted, and how deep Blackthorn went. The tracks ran parallel to the river, their rusted rails half buried in weeds. Reacher moved along them, his senses on edge. The air smelled of damp earth and oil, the kind of place where deals went down and bodies got dumped. He spotted fresh tire tracks in the mud, wide and deep. SUVs, not sedans. The suits were mobile, and they weren't hiding. He followed the tracks to a clearing, where the river bent and the trees thinned. A black SUV was parked near a pile of old crates, its engine off, but still warm. Reacher crouched low, watching. Two men stood nearby, both in dark suits, their postures stiff, professional. One was on a phone, his voice too low to catch. The other scanned the area, a pistol visible under his jacket. Reacher's pulse stayed steady. These weren't Kessler's men. They moved differently, like feds or private security. He didn't know which was worse. He edged closer, using the crates for cover, his ears straining to pick up the phone conversation. "Negative, no sign," the man said, his voice clipped. "He's got the files, though. We need to move before he cracks them." Reacher's grip tightened on the rifle. They knew about the folders, which meant they were watching the mill or the warehouse. The question was how. He didn't have time to think it through. The second man turned, his eyes locking onto the crates. Reacher froze, his body still, his breath shallow. "Check it," the man on the phone said, nodding towards the crates. Second man drew his pistol and moved closer, his steps careful. Reacher weighed his options. He could take them. 2 against 1 was nothing. But a fight would draw attention, and attention was the last thing he needed. He waited, letting the man get close, then moved fast. Reacher lunged, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting hard. The pistol dropped and Reacher drove his elbow into the guy's jaw. He went down without a sound, out cold. The man on the phone spun, reaching for his gun, but Reacher was faster. He closed the distance in 2 steps, slamming the man against the SUV. The phone clattered to the ground, still live. "Talk," Reacher growled, his forearm pinning the man's throat. "Who are you? Why Blackthorn?" The man's eyes were wide, but he didn't panic. "You're making a mistake, Reacher," he gasped. "You don't know what you're in." "Then tell me," Reacher said, pressing harder. The man coughed, his face reddening. "Blackthorn's dead, buried. You should have stayed gone." Reacher's jaw clenched. "My name's not buried. Who's pulling the strings?" The man's lips curled a grim smile. "You'll find out. Too late, but you will." Reacher didn't have time for games. He slammed the man's head against the SUV, not hard enough to kill, but enough to shut him up. The guy slumped unconscious. Reacher checked his pockets. Wallet, keys, a badge. The badge was plain, no logo, just a number and a name. Agent, Cole, Department of Defense. Reacher's blood went cold. DOD. This wasn't private. This was government, high level, and they were here for him. He pocketed the badge and checked the phone. The call was still active, a voice on the other end, barking orders. Reacher hung up and crushed the phone under his boot. The SUV's keys were in the ignition, but he left it. Cars were traceable, and he didn't need the heat. He tied the men with their own belts, leaving them in the weeds. They'd wake up sore, but alive. Reacher wasn't in the business of killing unless he had to. He moved back to the tracks, his mind racing. The DOD meant Blackthorn wasn't just an army screw-up. It was a federal secret, one they'd kill to protect. Cole's badge was a clue, but it raised more questions. Why was the DOD in Margrave? Why now? And how did Kessler fit in? Reacher didn't have answers, but he had the files, and they were his only leverage. He headed for the payphone, checking. His watch. Noon was close, and his contact should call soon. The woods were safer than the town, but he couldn't risk missing the call. He moved fast, sticking to back paths, his eyes scanning for tails. Margrave was awake, its streets buzzing with morning traffic, but he felt the eyes. Real or not, they were there. The payphone was empty, its metal warm from the sun. Reacher leaned against it, the folders and rifle hidden under his jacket. He didn't like waiting, but he didn't have a choice. His contact was his best shot at cracking Vance and Blackthorn. The phone rang at 12:03, sharp and loud. Reacher picked it up, staying silent. "Reacher?" the gruff voice said. "Yeah," Reacher said. "What you got?" The voice hesitated, then lowered. "Vance is a ghost. Colonel Elias Vance, West Point, retired 99. Office ridiculously, he's off. The grid, lives in Montana, doesn't talk. But there's chatter. He's been spotted in Georgia, near your spot. Not alone either. He's got muscle, private, not army." "Blackthorn?" Reacher asked. "Buried deep," the voice said. "I hit walls, Jack. Classified doesn't cover. This is need to know. And nobody needs to know. All I got is it was a chemical project, Fort Bragg, with West Point brains. Went bad, people died, and the army burned the records. Your name's in there, but I don't know why." Reacher's jaw tightened. "Keep digging, and watch your back." "You too," the voice said, and the line went dead. Reacher hung up, his mind sharp. Vance was in Georgia, maybe Margrave. That made him the older man from the warehouse, the one calling shots. Kessler was his dog, but the DOD was a wild card. Reacher didn't know how they fit, but he'd find out. He always did. He headed for the diner, his last safe spot. Rosie was behind the counter, her face pale when she saw him. "You look like hell," she said, pouring him coffee without asking. "Feel like it," Reacher said, sliding into a booth. "Vance, you hear anything new?" Rosie glanced around, her voice low. "Yeah, some trucker was in earlier, said he saw a guy matching that name at the old motel, the one by the highway. Not alone, had a crew, tough types. They paid cash, kept to themselves." Reacher nodded. The motel was his next stop. "Thanks, Rosie. You're doing good." She didn't smile. "I don't like this. Whatever you're in, it's bad." "Always is," Reacher said, leaving a tip and standing. The motel was a risk, but Vance was a prize. If he was there, Reacher would get answers one way or another. The motel was a mile out, a crumbling box with peeling paint and a half-lit sign. Reacher approached on foot, the rifle ready but hidden. The lot had 3 cars, 2 sedans and a pickup, none with clear plates. He spotted movement in a window, 2nd floor. Someone was there, and they weren't sleeping. He circled the building, checking exits. The back door was locked, but a fire escape led to the 2nd floor. Reacher climbed it, his steps silent on the rusted metal. The window was cracked, voices drifting out. He crouched, listening. "Reacher's got the files," a voice said, sharp and familiar. "Kessler." "He's not stopping. Then we end it," another voice said, older, rough. "Vance." "No, more games. He's a problem, and problems get solved." Reacher's blood went cold. Vance was here, and he was done playing. Reacher didn't know what Blackthorn was, but he knew one thing. He wasn't a problem to be solved. He eased the window open, slipping inside. The room was dark, but he saw them. Kessler by the door, Vance at a table, 2 other men with guns. Reacher moved fast, silent. He grabbed Kessler from behind, his arm locking around the man's throat. The others spun, but Reacher was ready, the rifle up and aimed. "Drop 'em!" he growled. "Now!" The men hesitated, their eyes on Vance. The colonel didn't flinch, his gaze cold, like he'd seen worse. "You're out of your depth, Reacher," he said. "Put it down. We talk." "Talk first," Reacher said, tightening his grip on Kessler. "Blackthorn. Why's my name in it?" Vance's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "You don't remember, do you? That's the beauty of it. You were there, and you don't even know." Reacher's jaw clenched. "Then tell me." Vance leaned back, his hands flat on the table. Blackthorn was a dream, a weapon to end wars. Chemicals, precise, clean. You were the muscle, Reacher, the badge that made it look legit. But it went wrong, and you walked away. We didn't, Reacher's. Mind raced, fragments clicking. A desert, orders, blood. "Who's we?" he asked. Vance didn't answer. His eyes flicked to the door, and Reacher heard it. Boots, heavy, coming fast. He shoved Kessler forward, diving for cover as the door burst open. Gunfire erupted, bullets chewing the walls. Reacher fired back, precise, dropping one man before, rolling to the window. He crashed through the glass, landing hard on the fire escape. The folders were still with him, the rifle too. He ran, the motel fading into the night. Vance's voice echoed in his head. "You were the badge!" Reacher didn't know what it meant, but he knew one thing. He wasn't done. Blackthorn was his past, and he'd tear it open no matter who stood in his way. Chapter 6. The mission that never was. The night was a cold fist, gripping Margrave as Jack Reacher sprinted through the shadows. The motel's gunfire still echoed in his ears, a sharp reminder of how close he'd come to being erased. The folders were secure under his jacket, the rifle heavy in his hands. Vance's words burned hotter than the bullets. You were the badge. Reacher didn't know what it meant, but it felt like a key, a piece of Blackthorn he couldn't shake. His past was a locked door, and every step in this town was kicking it harder. He moved fast, sticking to alleys and backlots, his boots barely touching the ground. Margrave was a trap, its streets too narrow, its secrets too deep. Kessler was still out there, and Vance was calling the shots. The DoD suits were a wild card, their badge, Agent Cole, Department of Defense, proof this wasn't just an army cover-up. Blackthorn was a federal ghost, and Reacher was its loose end. He needed a new hideout. The woods were burned, the barn too exposed. The folders were his only leverage, but they were a target painted on his back. He had to read them, to crack Blackthorn open before Vance's men, or worse, caught up. His gut told him the mission was the heart of it, the thing Vance called a dream gone wrong. Chemical weapons, dead soldiers, a debrief at West Point. Reacher's name was tied to it, but the details were smoke slipping through his fingers. He found a spot near the river, a crumbling shed half hidden by reeds. The air was damp, thick with the smell of mud and decay. Reacher slipped inside, checking for signs of life, nothing but cobwebs and rusted tools. He crouched in the dark, the folders in his lap, the rifle close. The shed wasn't safe, but it was quiet, and quiet was what he needed. He opened the first folder, his pen flashlight casting a thin beam. The pages were dense, coded in Army shorthand, but he pieced it together. Operation Blackthorn, 1998. Fort Bragg. Objective: test deployment of chemical agent X-17, designed for precision strikes. The words were cold, clinical, but they hit like a blade. X-17. Reacher didn't remember it, but the name felt heavy, like a stone in his chest. The file mentioned a desert site, off-grid, with minimal oversight. Casualties were listed, 27, all redacted. Reacher's name appeared under security detail, with a note, debriefed, West Point, July 98. Cleared. The words stung. Cleared of what? He flipped to another page, a memo from Vance. Project terminated due to unforeseen outcomes. All records sealed. Personnel reassigned. Reacher's role was vague. Security, oversight, a badge to make it look clean. But Vance's words at the motel echoed, "You walked away." We didn't. Reacher hadn't walked away from anything. He'd been cut loose, left to drift, his memory a blank where Blackthorn should have been. He closed the folder, his jaw tight. The mission was a lie, a thing that never officially happened. But it had happened. People died, and someone was still cleaning up. Vance was the key, and Kessler was his shadow. The DoD suits meant this wasn't just about the past. It was about now, about whatever Blackthorn had become. Reacher stood, tucking the folders back under his jacket. The shed was too close to town, too easy to find. He needed to move to keep the hunters off balance. His army contact's call was a dead end for now. Vance was in Margrave, and that was enough. Reacher's next move was the motel. Vance wouldn't stay after the fight. But he might have left something behind. A clue, a trail, anything to point to Blackthorn's heart. He slipped out of the shed, the river's murmur covering his steps. The night was deep, the stars gone behind thick clouds. Margrave was asleep, but Reacher felt its pulse, a town alive with secrets. He moved along the riverbank, his senses sharp, the rifle a cold weight. The motel was a mile off, its neon sign a faint glow in the distance. He approached from the back, the fire escape still dangling where he'd jumped. The lot was empty, the cars gone. Vance's crew had cleared out, but the air felt wrong, like a held breath. Reacher climbed the fire, escape, his boots silent on the metal. The second-floor window was shattered, glass glinting in the dark. He slipped inside, landing in the room where he'd faced Vance. The place was trashed, bullet holes in the walls, furniture overturned, blood on the floor. Reacher's fight had been fast, but it had left a mark. He scanned the room, his flashlight sweeping low. The table was bare, but under it, half hidden by a chair, was a crumpled notebook. He picked it up, flipping through it. Names, dates, locations, all coded, but one entry stood out. X17, Margrave, 2025. Delivery confirmed. Reacher's blood went cold. 2025. Now. Blackthorn wasn't dead. It was alive here, in this town. X17, the chemical agent, was moving again. The warehouse, the shipment, the canister. It all clicked. Vance wasn't just covering tracks. He was running a new operation, and Reacher had walked right into it. He pocketed the notebook and moved to the window. A faint noise stopped him. Tires on gravel, slow and deliberate. He peered out, seeing a black SUV pull into the lot. Two men stepped out, suits crisp, movements sharp. DoD, like Cole. They weren't here by chance. Reacher's fight had drawn them, or someone had tipped them off. He didn't wait. He slipped down the fire escape, landing softly in the shadows. The men were at the motel's front door, their voices low. Reacher caught fragments. Files. Reacher. Containment. They knew he had the folders, and they weren't here to talk. He moved along the lot's edge, the rifle ready but hidden. A fight was coming, but not now, not here. He headed for the tracks, the notebook and folders secure. The DoD meant Blackthorn was bigger than Vance, bigger than Margrave. Reacher needed to know how far it went, and who was pulling the strings. The diner was his next stop. Rosie was his only ally, shaky as that was. She'd heard about Vance, and she might have heard more. The diner was dark, closed for the night, but a faint light glowed inside. Reacher tapped the glass, keeping low. Rosie appeared, her face pale, her hands trembling as she unlocked the door. "You're gonna get me killed," she whispered, letting him in. Not if I can help it, Reacher said, his voice low. You hear anything? About Vance, or a chemical called X-17? Rosie's eyes widened. X-17? No, but there's been talk. Truckers saying weird stuff's moving through town. Crates, guarded, not normal cargo. They mentioned a name, Vance, like you said. Said he's got a place out by the quarry. Old army bunker. Reacher nodded, his mind locking onto the quarry. Where is it? North, past the mill, Rosie said. Nobody goes there. It's fenced off, guarded sometimes. You sure about this? No, Reacher said, his tone flat. Thanks, Rosie. Stay low. He left the diner, the night closing around him. The quarry was his next move, but it was a fortress, and Vance would be ready. Reacher didn't care. He had the files, the notebook, and a name, X-17. Chez Matur. Was alive, and he was in its heart. He moved through Margrave, a ghost in a town that wanted him dead. The quarry was a few miles out, and he'd hit it at dawn, when the light would hide him. For now, he needed a new hideout, somewhere to plan. The riverbank was too open, the woods too close. He spotted an old church, its steeple crooked, its doors boarded. It would do. He pried a board loose and slipped inside, the air thick with dust and mildew. The pews were rotting, the altar bare, but it was quiet, and quiet was enough. Reacher sat in the dark, the folders and notebook in his lap. He opened the notebook again, reading the coded entries. Most were gibberish, but the dates were clear. Shipments, meetings, all recent. Margrave was a hub, and X-17 was the prize. He closed the notebook, his mind heavy. Blackthorn was a mission that never was, a lie buried in blood. But it was back, and Reacher was its target. Vance knew his role, and so did the DoD. Reacher didn't, but he'd find out. He always did. The church was silent, the night deep. Reacher leaned back, the rifle across his knees, his eyes on the door. The quarry was waiting, and so was Vance. Blackthorn was his past, his fight, and he'd tear it apart, no matter who stood in his way. Chapter 7. Betrayal in the Ranks. The old church was a hollow shell, its walls groaning under the weight of years. Jack Reacher sat in the dark, the rifle across his knees, the folders and notebook beside him. The air was thick with dust, but it was quiet, and quiet let him think. Operation Blackthorn, X-17, Vance, Margrave. The pieces were coming together, but the puzzle was still a mess. His name was in the files, tied to a mission he couldn't remember, a chemical weapon that shouldn't exist. And now, the DoD was hunting him. Their badge, Agent Cole, proof this was no small cover-up. Reacher's mind was sharp, cutting through the fog of his past. Vance's words at the motel, "You were the badge," stuck like a splinter. He'd been military police, a major, the guy who kept things clean. But Blackthorn wasn't clean. It was blood and lies, and someone had used him to make it look right. The betrayal burned, not because he cared about loyalty, but because he hated being played. The notebook's coded entries pointed to the quarry, a bunker where Vance was holed up, X-17 was moving, and Margrave was the hub. Reacher didn't know why, but he knew one thing. He had to stop it. The files were his weapon, the truth his edge. But truth was slippery in a town like this, where everyone had a secret and no one talked straight. He stood, tucking the folders and notebook under his jacket. Dawn was close, the sky outside turning grey. The quarry was his next move, but it was a lion's den, guarded, locked tight, with Vance and his crew waiting. Reacher didn't care. He'd faced worse odds and walked away. The rifle was heavy, but he'd use it if he had to. Fists were better, but Blackthorn wasn't a fist fight. He slipped out of the church, the boarded door creaking as he moved. The town was still asleep, its streets empty under the mist. Reacher headed north, toward the quarry, his steps silent on the damp ground. The air smelled of river and rust, a reminder of Margrave's decay. He didn't trust this place, didn't trust anyone. Rosie was the closest he had to an ally, but even she was a risk. Small towns talked, and talk got people killed. The quarry was a mile out, past the mill's charred remains. Reacher approached on foot, sticking to the tree line where the shadows were thick. The terrain was rough, rocks and roots underfoot, but he moved like he was born to it. The quarry loomed ahead, a gash in the earth surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. A gate stood at the entrance, locked and guarded by two men with rifles. Reacher crouched low, watching. They were pros, their movements sharp, their eyes scanning the dark. He circled the perimeter, looking for a weak spot. The fence was solid, but a section near the river was rusted, its base loose in the mud. Reacher worked fast, prying it up with a stick, just enough to slide under. The ground was wet, cold against his chest, but he didn't care. He was in. The quarry was a maze of gravel piles and old machinery, its air heavy with dust and diesel. A concrete bunker sat at the centre, its entrance lit by a single bulb. Reacher moved closer, using the shadows for cover. Voices came from inside, low and urgent. He recognized one. Kessler, the snake who wouldn't die. The other was Vance, his rough tone cutting through the night. "Files are gone," Kessler was saying, his voice tight. "He's got them, and he's not stopping." "Then we finish it," Vance said, calm but hard. "No more mistakes. Reacher's a problem, but he's not the only one. The DOD's sniffing around, and they're not ours." Reacher's pulse quickened. The DOD wasn't with Vance. That changed things. Cole's badge had screamed government. But if they weren't Vance's allies, they were another player, and Reacher was caught in the middle. He edged closer, peering through a cracked window. The bunker was small, packed with crates and a table covered in maps. Vance stood at the head, his face lined but unyielding. Kessler paced, his scar glinting in the light. Two other men were there, armed, their eyes on the door. "He doesn't remember," Kessler said, his tone sharp. "That's our edge, but he's digging, and he's close. If he cracks the files—" "He won't," Vance cut in. "We move X-17 tonight. The buyer's waiting, and the DOD won't touch us once it's gone. Reacher's a ghost. We make him stay that way." Reacher's jaw clenched. X-17, moving tonight. A buyer. Blackthorn wasn't just a failed project. It was a black market deal, and Vance was running it. Reacher didn't know who the buyer was, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let that chemical leave Margrave. The files had mentioned casualties, 27 dead in 98. He wouldn't let it happen again. He backed away, his mind racing. The bunker was a fortress, and Vance's crew was armed to the teeth. A frontal assault was suicide, even for him. He needed a plan, something to scatter them, to get to X-17 before it moved. The crates outside caught his eye. Some were marked, with hazard symbols, like the canister from the warehouse. If he could destroy them, or at least slow the shipment, he'd buy time. Reacher moved to the crates, his flashlight low. They were sealed, but the labels were clear. X-17, handle with care. He didn't know what the chemical did, but he didn't need to. It was bad, and it was leaving tonight unless he stopped it. He found a fuel can nearby, half full, its contents sharp in the air. Fire had worked at the mill. It could work here. He poured the fuel over the crates, keeping low. The guards at the gate were still, their backs to him. Reacher struck a match, the flame small but steady. He tossed it, and the crates caught fast, flames licking up into the night. Shouts erupted from the bunker, boots pounding. Reacher slipped back to the fence, his body low, the rifle ready. Kessler burst out first, cursing, his gun drawn. Vance followed, his face a mask of rage. The guards ran from the gate, joining the chaos. Reacher watched, waiting. The fire was spreading, the crates popping as the heat hit their contents. He didn't know if X-17 would burn or blow, but either way, it was a problem for Vance. He moved to the bunker's entrance. The door left open in the panic. Inside was a mess, papers scattered, crates half-packed. Reacher grabbed a satchel from the table, stuffing it with anything that looked useful. Maps, a USB drive, a list of names. One caught his eye. Major Thomas Brandt, Fort Bragg, 1998. Another ghost, tied to Blackthorn. Reacher didn't know him, but the name felt heavy, like a memory he couldn't reach. A shout snapped him back. Kessler was back, his gun raised, his eyes wild. "Reacher!" he yelled, firing before Reacher could move. The bullet grazed his arm, hot and sharp. Reacher dove behind a crate, his rifle up. He fired once, aiming low, catching Kessler's leg. The man went down, screaming, his gun skidding across the floor. Reacher didn't stop. He ran, the satchel over his shoulder, the folders still secure. The fire was roaring now, the quarry a chaos of smoke and shouts. He slid under the fence, his arm burning but functional. The woods were his cover, the river his guide. He moved fast, putting distance between him and the quarry. The satchel was heavy, its contents a new puzzle. The USB drive was a risk. Tech wasn't his thing, but it might hold answers the files didn't. Brandt's name was another lead, maybe a betrayer like Vance, maybe a victim. Reacher didn't know, but he'd find out. He found a new hideout. An abandoned trailer half buried in vines. The air was sour, the floor soft with rot, but it was hidden, and that was enough. Reacher sat, checking his arm. The graze was shallow, blood clotting fast. He'd had worse. He opened the satchel, spreading its contents on the floor. The maps showed routes, Margrave to Atlanta, then overseas. The names were coded, but Brandt's stood out, unredacted, like a dare. He opened the files again, cross-checking. Brandt was mentioned once, a major like Reacher, tied to Blackthorn's security. A note said he'd been reassigned after 98, but Reacher knew what that meant. Erased like the others. The betrayal was clear now. Blackthorn's leaders had used men like him and Brandt, then cut them loose when it went bad. Vance was still playing that game, selling X-17 to the highest bidder. Reacher's fists clenched. He didn't care about the army's lies, not anymore. But X-17 was real, and it was here. He couldn't let it leave Margrave, not with 27 dead already on its name. Vance was the key, and Kessler was his weak link. Reacher would break them both. Dawn was breaking, the sky a dull red. Reacher stood, the satchel and rifle ready. The trailer was safe for now, but he couldn't stay. The DoD was still out there, and the quarry fire would draw them like flies. He needed to move, to find Brandt or his trail, to stop X-17 before it was gone. He headed for the diner, his last lifeline. Rosie was his only shot at fresh intel, and he needed to know if the town was talking. Margrave was a pressure cooker, and he was the heat. He moved through the woods, a ghost in a world that wanted him dead. Blackthorn was his past, his betrayal, and he'd burn it down, no matter who stood in his way. Chapter 8. The Woman Who Knew Too Much. The woods were a maze of shadows, their silence broken only by the crunch of leaves under Jack Reacher's boots. The satchel hung heavy over his shoulder, stuffed with maps, a USB drive, and the name that burned in his mind, Major Thomas Brandt. The folders under his jacket were a ticking bomb, their secrets, Blackthorn, X-17 Vance, tying him to a past he couldn't fully grasp. His arm stung from Kessler's bullet graze, but pain was just noise. Reacher was focused, his mind sharp as a blade. Margrave was a cage, and he was running out of time to break free. The quarry fire would have drawn attention. Vance's crew, the DoD suits, maybe even local cops. Reacher didn't trust any of them. The files painted a grim picture. Blackthorn was a chemical weapons project, a betrayal dressed in army green, and X-17 was its poison heart. Vance was selling it. Kessler was his dog, and the DoD was circling, their motives murky. Reacher's name was in the files, a badge for a mission that never was, and someone wanted him erased for it. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. The diner was his only safe spot. Rosie, his only link to Margrave's pulse. She'd heard about Vance, the quarry, the strange crates. If anyone knew about Brandt or the suits, it'd be her. Small towns hid secrets, but they whispered, and Rosie listened. Reacher moved through the dawn, the sky a dull grey. The trailer was behind him. Its rotten vines a good hideout, but too close to the quarry's chaos. He stuck to back paths, the rifle hidden under his jacket, the satchel tight against his side. Margrave was waking, its streets stirring with early risers, but he was a ghost, unseen and untouchable. For now, the diner's neon buzzed faintly as he approached. It was open, the breakfast crowd thin. Truckers, a few locals, no one who looked like trouble. Reacher tapped the glass, catching Rosie's eye. She was behind the counter, her face tight with worry. She unlocked the door, her hands quick, her voice low. "You're back," she said, glancing over his shoulder. "Trouble follows you, doesn't it?" "Always," Reacher said, stepping inside. The diner smelled of bacon and coffee, a slice of normal in a town gone wrong. He slid into a corner booth, his back to the wall, his eyes on the door. "Need your help, Rosie. A name, Thomas Brant. Army, maybe around here. You heard it?" Rosie sat across from him, her apron creased, her eyes searching his. "Brant? Yeah, I know it. Not a man, though. Ellen Brant. She's local, or was. Used to work at the library, quiet type. Kept to herself. Folks said she had army ties, maybe a brother or husband. She left town a while back, but her name's been coming up lately." Reacher's pulse quickened. Ellen Brant, not Thomas. A sister, maybe, or a wife. The files listed Major Thomas Brant, but Rosie's words shifted the ground. If Ellen was tied to Blackthorn, she might know why Thomas was erased, and why Reacher's name was next. "Where is she?" he asked, his tone low. Rosie hesitated, her fingers twisting the edge of her apron. Heard she's back, staying at her old place. A cabin, out by the lake. Nobody goes there. It's off the grid, falling apart. But she's been seen, and people are talking. Said she's scared, like she's hiding. "Hiding from what?" Reacher pressed. Rosie's eyes flicked to the door, then back. "Don't know. But those suits you asked about? They were at the bar last night asking about her, and Vance's name came up too. Whatever's going on, she's in it." Reacher nodded, his mind locking onto the cabin. Ellen Brant was a lead, maybe the best he had. If she knew about Blackthorn, she could fill in the blanks. Thomas, X-17, the betrayal. But the suits were hunting her, and that meant danger. Reacher didn't care. Danger was his world, and he was good at it. "Thanks, Rosie," he said, sliding her a bill. "Keep this quiet, and watch yourself." She didn't smile, just nodded, her face pale. "You be careful, too. This town's turning ugly." Reacher left the diner, the morning air sharp against his skin. The lake was a few miles out, past the quarry's smoke. He'd hit the cabin at dusk, when the light would hide him. For now, he needed to stay low, to check the satchel's contents and plan his move. The church was burned, the trailer too, close. He spotted an old grain silo. Its metal rusted but standing, half hidden by weeds. It would do. He slipped inside, the air cool and stale. The silo was empty, its floor littered with dirt and broken glass. Reacher sat, spreading the satchel's contents on the ground. The maps showed shipping routes, the USB drive a mystery he couldn't crack without a computer. The list of names was short, most redacted, but Brant's stood out, tied to Blackthorn's. Security. A note in the margin read, "EB contacted 2025. Uncooperative." Reacher's jaw tightened. EB, Ellen Brant. She'd been contacted, which meant she knew something, maybe too much. The suits were after her, and Vance's crew wouldn't be far behind. Reacher didn't know her role, but he knew one thing. She was in danger, and she was his key to Blackthorn. He opened the folders, cross-checking. Thomas Brant was a major, like Reacher, part of Blackthorn's inner circle. The files didn't say how he died, but reassigned was code for gone. Killed or buried so deep he'd never surface. Ellen was his shadow, a loose end like Reacher, and she was here, in Margrave. The coincidence wasn't random. Blackthorn was pulling them all back, like a tide dragging debris to shore. Reacher packed the satchel, his arm throbbing but ignored. The silo was safe for now, but dusk was his deadline. He'd hit the cabin, find Ellen, and get answers. If she was scared, she'd talk, one way or another. He didn't like leaning on civilians, but Blackthorn wasn't a game, and X-17 wasn't a theory. It was real, and it was moving. He slipped out of the silo, the sun climbing higher. Margrave was alive now, its streets buzzing with cars and voices. Reacher moved through the backlots, a drifter in a town that didn't want him. The lake was his target, but he needed one more stop, the payphone, to check if his army contact had called back. The number was a long shot, but Reacher didn't believe in luck. He believed in persistence. The payphone was still there, its metal dented but working. He dropped a quarter, dialing his contact's number. It rang once, then a voice answered, gruff and tense. "Reacher?" "Talk," Reacher said, his voice low. "Vance is bad news," the contact said. "Found a thread. He's not retired. Not really. Runs a private outfit now. Black Ops. Off the books. Blackthorn's his baby. Always was. He's moving something, Reacher, and it's not just weapons. Word is, there's a woman involved. Ellen Brandt. She knows too much, and Vance wants her quiet." Reacher's grip tightened. "Where is she?" "Lake Cabin, Margrave. But it's hot. Vance's men are closing in, and the DOD's not far behind. You're in deep, Jack. Walk away." "Not my style," Reacher said. "Keep digging, and don't get caught." The line went dead. Reacher hung up, his jaw tight. Ellen Brandt was the center now, a woman who knew too much. Vance wanted her dead. The DOD wanted her secrets, and Reacher needed her alive. The cabin was his only lead, and dusk was coming fast. He headed for the lake, sticking to the woods where the shadows were long. The terrain was rough, but Reacher was built for it, his body moving like a machine. The lake appeared through the trees, its water still and dark. The cabin was a speck on the shore, its roof sagging, its windows boarded. Smoke curled from a chimney, faint but real. Someone was there. Reacher crouched, watching. The cabin was isolated, but tire tracks in the dirt told him it wasn't empty. A sedan was parked nearby, its plates obscured. He didn't see movement, but his gut screamed danger. Ellen Brandt was inside, and she wasn't alone. He circled the cabin, the rifle ready but low. A back window was cracked, its board loose. Reacher pried it open, slipping inside. The air was warm, heavy with the smell of wood smoke and fear. A woman sat at a table, her back to him, her hands trembling as she clutched a mug. She was older, her hair grey, her frame thin but tense. Ellen Brandt. Reacher stepped forward, his boots soft on the floor. She spun, her eyes wide, a pistol in her hand. "Who are you?" she snapped, her voice shaking but firm. "Reacher," he said, keeping his hands up. "I'm not here to hurt you. I need to talk." Her eyes narrowed, the gun steady. "Reacher, from Blackthorn." He nodded, his pulse steady. "You know me. How?" She didn't lower the gun. "My brother, Thomas. He talked about you. Said you were the only one who questioned it. Then he disappeared, and they said it was an accident. I know better." Reacher's mind raced. Thomas Brandt, his brother. Another piece of the puzzle. "What was Blackthorn?" he asked, his voice low. "What did Thomas know?" Ellen's face hardened, but her eyes were wet. It was a lie. A weapon they said would save lives. X-17 they called it. Thomas was security like you. He saw what it did. People died, Reacher, not soldiers, civilians. He wanted to talk, to stop it. So they killed him, Bufang Shaw. They erased him like he never existed. Reacher's jaw clenched. Civilians. That hit hard. A memory flashing. Screams, smoke, a desert sky red with fire. He didn't remember it clearly, but it was there, buried deep. "Who's they?" he asked. Ellen's voice dropped, barely a whisper. "Vance, the army. People who didn't want the truth out. Now they're back, and they're after me. I kept Thomas's notes, his proof. They know I have it." Reacher's blood went cold. Notes, proof, where are they? She hesitated, then nodded toward a floorboard. "Under there, but you won't get far. They're coming." A noise outside, tires, boots, voices. Reacher spun, the rifle up. The cabin was surrounded, shadows moving in the dusk. Vance's men, or the DOD, it didn't matter. Ellen was right. They were here, and time was up. "Stay down," Reacher said, his voice hard. He pried up the floorboard, finding a small box stuffed with papers. He grabbed it, tucking it with the folders. The door burst open, and gunfire erupted, bullets tearing through the walls. Reacher fired back, precise, dropping 2 men before diving for the window. Ellen followed, her pistol in hand, her fear buried under grit. They crashed through the glass, landing hard in the dirt. Reacher pulled her up, running for the trees as shouts and shots chased them. The lake was their cover, its shadows deep. Reacher didn't look back. Ellen was with him. The box was his, and Blackthorn was closer than ever. Vance wanted them dead, but Reacher wasn't dying today. He'd find the truth, and he'd make them pay. Chapter 9. Echoes from the Desert. The lake's edge was a blur of reeds and shadows as Jack Reacher pulled Ellen Brandt through the trees, the crack of gunfire fading behind them. The box of Thomas Brandt's notes was clutched tight in his hand, the folders and satchel still secure under his jacket. His arm burned from the graze, his lungs tight from the run, but Reacher didn't slow. Margrave was a death trap, and the men at the cabin, Vance's crew or DOD suits, were proof. Blackthorn was a live wire, and he was holding it with both hands. Ellen stumbled, her breath ragged, but she kept up, her pistol still in her grip. She was tougher than she looked, a woman carved by loss and fear, but not broken. Reacher respected that. She knew Blackthorn, knew what it cost her brother, and now she was his best shot at cracking it open. The notes were the key. Proof, she'd said, of a project that killed civilians and buried the truth. Reacher needed that truth, not just for himself, but to stop X-17 before it left Margrave. They reached a ditch, deep and hidden by brush. Reacher pulled Ellen down, his eyes scanning the dark. The lake was quiet, the cabin's chaos a faint glow in the distance. No footsteps, no shouts. They'd lost their pursuers for now. He crouched, the rifle ready, his voice low. "You okay?" Ellen nodded, her face pale but set. "They'll keep coming," she whispered. "Vance won't stop. Neither will the others." "Who's the others?" Reacher asked, his tone hard. "Doody? Someone else?" She shook her head, her eyes haunted. "I don't know. Thomas warned me, said Blackthorn wasn't just army. It was bigger, people with money, power. He didn't trust anyone, not after what he saw. Reacher's jaw tightened. Bigger than the army. That explained the DOD's badge, the suits, the way Margrave felt like a stage. Blackthorne was a machine, and he was a cog they wanted crushed. He opened the box, his pen flashlight casting a thin beam. Papers, handwritten, stuffed tight, Thomas Brandt's notes, scrawled in a hurry, coded but clear enough to read. Dates, names, places. One word jumped out. Nevada, 1998. Reacher's mind flashed. Sand, heat, a sky red with dust. A desert base, off the grid, where Blackthorne was born. He didn't remember it clearly, but the echo was there. A scream he couldn't place. He scanned the notes, his pulse steady but quick. Thomas had been there, security like Reacher, watching a test that went wrong. X-17 deployed, unauthorized, civilian exposure, casualties, 27, cover-up ordered. Reacher's name was there, too, a witness cleared but not clean. He closed the box, his fists clenched. Civilians. That was the line Blackthorne crossed, the one Thomas couldn't stomach. Reacher didn't remember the test, but he felt its weight, a guilt he hadn't earned but carried. Vance was selling X-17 now, to buyers with no lines at all. Reacher wouldn't let it happen. "We need to move," he said, helping Ellen up. "They'll search the lake. You know a place, somewhere off the map." Ellen nodded, her voice low. "There's an old hunting lodge west of here. Nobody goes there. It's falling apart, but it's hidden." "Good," Reacher said. "Lead the way." They moved through the woods, the night their shield. Ellen was quiet, her steps sure despite her fear. Reacher followed, the rifle low, his senses sharp. Margrave was a pressure cooker, and the cabin, Veidt had turned up the heat. Vance knew he had the notes now, and the DOD wasn't far behind. Reacher needed time to read, to plan, to find the buyer before X-17 was gone. The lodge was a mile out, a sagging heap of logs and moss tucked in a hollow. The air was damp, the windows dark. Reacher checked it. Empty, no tracks, no traps. They slipped inside, the floor creaking under their weight. A table, a chair, a rusted stove. It was enough. Reacher set the box and satchel down, the folders beside them. Ellen sat across, her pistol on the table, her eyes on the door. "Tell me everything," Reacher said, his voice low but firm. "Thomas, Blackthorne, the desert. Don't hold back." Ellen's hands shook, but her voice was steady. "Thomas was my brother. Army, like you. Proud, tough. He got pulled into Blackthorne in '98, said it was big, a game changer. A chemical weapon, X-17, meant to hit only the enemy. He was security, making sure the tests stayed secret. You were there, Reacher. He said you didn't like it, asked questions nobody else did." Reacher's mind flickered. A briefing, a desert tent, voices arguing. He didn't remember Thomas, but the feeling was there. A knot of wrongness. "What happened?" he asked. "The test," Ellen said, her voice breaking. "Nevada. Some nowhere place. They used X-17, but it wasn't clean. The wind shifted, or they miscalculated. It hit a village nearby. Civilians, families. 27 dead, Reacher. Thomas saw the bodies. Said it wasn't an accident. Someone wanted it to happen, to see what X-17 could do." Reacher's fists clenched, the echo louder now. screams, smoke, a child's shoe in the sand. He didn't know if it was real, but it felt like it. "Who ordered it?" he asked. "Vance," Ellen said, her eyes hard. "He was in charge, but he wasn't alone. Thomas found papers, names, politicians, contractors, people who funded Blackthorn. He wanted to go public, but they got to him first. Car accident, they said. I knew it was a lie. I kept his notes, hid them. Now they're after me." Reacher nodded, his mind sharp. Vance was the head, but Blackthorn was a hydra. Its heads in boardrooms and government halls. The DoD suits weren't cleaning up. They were protecting their own. Reacher was a threat, and so was Ellen. The notes were their leverage, but leverage was only good if they stayed alive. He opened the box again, scanning Thomas's scrawl. Names half-coded: Senator K. Langston, Omnicorp, General M. Tate. Dates matched the files, meetings, payments, X-17's revival in 2025. Margrave was the hub, the quarry its heart. The buyer was mentioned once, a code, Red Crescent. Reacher didn't know what it meant, but it wasn't good. X-17 in the wrong hands was a nightmare, and the hands were closing in. "We can't stay here long," Reacher said, packing the notes. "Vance knows you're with me, the suits too. We need to move, find the buyer, stop X-17. Ellen's eyes were wet, but her voice was firm. "I'm not running. Thomas died for this. I'll help you, Reacher, but I want them to pay." "They will," Reacher said, his tone cold. He didn't make promises, but this one was real. Vance, the suits, the names in the notes. They'd answer for Blackthorn, for the desert, for the betrayal. A noise outside. Twigs snapping, soft but deliberate. Reacher grabbed the rifle, motioning Ellen to stay low. He crept to the window, peering through a crack. Shadows moved in the trees, 3 men, armed, their movements sharp. Not Vance's crew. Too clean, too precise. Dodie, like coal. They'd tracked them, and they were here to end it. Reacher's pulse stayed steady. 3 against 1, with Ellen as backup. He'd faced worse. He whispered to her, "Back door. If I go down, run. Don't look back." She nodded, her pistol ready. Reacher moved to the front, his body low, the rifle up. The men were close, their boots crunching on gravel. He didn't wait. He kicked the door open, firing once, twice, aiming for legs. 2 men dropped, shouting their guns. Useless. The 3rd dove for cover, returning fire, bullets splintering the lodge's walls. Reacher rolled, his shots precise, catching the 3rd man's shoulder. The guy went down, groaning. Reacher was on him in seconds, disarming him, his knee on the man's chest. "Talk," he growled. "Who sent you? Why Blackthorn?" The man's eyes were pain-filled but defiant. "You're dead, Reacher," he spat. "You and the woman. Blackthorn's bigger than you know." Reacher pressed harder, the man gasping. "Names, now!" "Langston," the man choked. "Senator, he's protecting it." Reacher's blood went cold. Langston, from the notes, a senator tied to Blackthorn's funding. The DoD wasn't rogue. They were his dogs. Reacher knocked the man out, tying him with his own belt. The other 2 were down, alive but useless. Ellen was at the door, her face pale but steady. "We need to go," Reacher said, grabbing the satchel and box. "They'll send more." She nodded, her pistol still in hand. They ran, the woods swallowing them, the lodge a fading speck. The desert's echo was louder now, a scream Reacher couldn't ignore. Blackthorn was a monster, and he was its hunter. Langston, Vance, X-17. They'd fall, and he'd make sure of it. Chapter 10. The Codebreaker's Secret. The woods were a tangle of roots and darkness, swallowing Jack Reacher and Ellen Brandt as they fled the hunting lodge. The satchel swung heavy on his shoulder, stuffed with maps, a USB drive, and Thomas Brandt's notes. The folders under his jacket pressed against his ribs. Their secrets: Blackthorn, X-17, Senator Langston. A weight he couldn't shake. The rifle was in his hands, its barrel still warm from the fight. Ellen kept pace, her pistol clutched tight, her face set with a grit that matched his own. Margrave was furnace, and they were running through its flames. The DOD men at the lodge were down, but more would come. Langston's name, spat by the dying agent, was a bombshell. A senator tied to Blackthorn's funding, pulling strings from D.C., while Vance ran the ground game in Margrave. X-17 was moving, the buyer, Red Crescent, waiting, and Reacher was the only thing standing in their way. He didn't know the full shape of Blackthorn, but he knew enough. It was a betrayal, born in a desert, paid for in civilian blood, and he was its loose end. They needed a new hideout, somewhere to crack the notes and plan their next move. The lodge was burned, the quarry a war zone, the town a trap. Reacher's mind was sharp, piecing together the fragments. Thomas's notes mentioned a code, a cipher used to hide Blackthorn's deepest secrets. If Ellen knew it, or could guess it, they might unlock the names, the buyer, the plan. But time was short, and Margrave's shadows were long. Reacher led them deeper into the woods, toward a spot he'd scouted days ago, an old railway shed, rusted and forgotten, half buried in vines. The air was damp, the ground soft with moss. He checked it, empty, no tracks, no eyes. They slipped inside, the shed's walls creaking but holding. A broken bench was their table, the floor their seat. Reacher set the satchel and box down, the folders beside them. Ellen sank against the wall, her breath steadying, her eyes sharp despite the fear. "We're not safe here," she said, her voice low. "They'll find us." "Not yet," Reacher said, his tone hard. "We've got time. Thomas's notes. There's a code. You know it." Ellen's eyes flicked to the box, her hands tightening. "He taught me a little. Army ciphers, simple ones. He said Blackthorn used something older, a mix of substitution and transposition. But I never saw it, not all of it. He was careful, even with me." "Careful's dead," Reacher said, opening the box. "We need it now. Show me." She nodded, pulling out a stack of Thomas's notes. The pages were a mess of numbers, letters, and symbols scrawled in a hand that spoke of haste and fear. Reacher's flashlight lit them up, its beam cutting through the shed's gloom. Ellen pointed to a line. K12, Shift 7, Grid 444. "This is part of it," she said. "A key, maybe." Thomas said the real stuff, names, places, was locked behind it. Reacher's mind locked onto the cipher. He wasn't a codebreaker, but he knew patterns, and patterns were math, and math was truth. He spread the notes, his eyes scanning. The numbers repeated, the letters too, but in blocks, like a grid. 4 by 4, he said, his voice low. 16 letters, rearranged. The shift's a Caesar cipher, 7 places, K-12's the starting point. Ellen's eyes widened. You know this stuff. Enough, Reacher said. He'd seen ciphers in the army, used them to secure ops. Blackthorn's was old school, clumsy, but effective. He grabbed a scrap of paper from the satchel, scribbling the alphabet, shifting it 7 places. A became I, B became J. He applied it to the first block, a string of letters, MJQQF. Shifted back, it became EDIM. No sense yet. The grid was next. He drew a 4x4 square, filling it with the letters, rearranging them by the transposition key. The shed was silent, Ellen watching. Her breath held. The letters shifted, forming a word. Omnicorp. Reacher's blood went cold. Omnicorp, from Thomas's notes, a contractor tied to Blackthorn's funding. Not a fluke. The cipher worked. Keep going, Ellen said, her voice urgent. There's more. Reacher cracked another block, then another. Names emerged. Langston, Tate, Red Crescent. Locations, Margrave, Atlanta, Dubai. Dates, May 4th, 2025, tomorrow. X-17 was moving, and the buyer was foreign. The name Red Crescent, a code for something Reacher didn't trust. Dubai meant money, big money, and Omnicorp was the muscle behind it. He leaned back, his jaw tight. The notes were a map, and they were pointing to a deal, a sale that would put X-17 in hands that didn't care about civilian blood. Langston was protecting it, Vance was running it, and the DoD was either complicit or clueless. Reacher didn't care which. He'd stop it one way or another. Ellen's face was pale, her eyes on the names. Omnicorp, she whispered. Thomas mentioned them. Said they were the ones who pushed Blackthorn, paid for the tests. He hated them. They're not alone, Reacher said, packing the notes. Langston's in D.C., Tate's army, and Red Crescent's the buyer. We need to hit the quarry again, find the shipment before it leaves. Ellen shook her head, her voice shaking. It's suicide. Vance has men, guns, and he knows we're coming. Then we're smarter, Reacher said, his tone cold. We don't hit hard. We hit quiet. Get the shipment, destroy it, and vanish. She didn't argue, but her eyes were heavy. Reacher didn't blame her. Blackthorn had taken her brother, and now it was taking her life. But she was in, and that was enough. He checked the rifle, the satchel, the box. The USB drive was still a mystery. He needed a computer, but Margrave wasn't tech-friendly, and he didn't trust public machines. The notes were enough for now. A noise outside, soft, like a branch under a boot. Reacher froze, the rifle up, his hand signaling Ellen to stay down. He crept to the shed's door, peering through a crack. A shadow moved, then another. 2 men, armed, their silhouettes sharp against the moonlight. Not DoD, sloppier, Vance's crew. They'd tracked them, maybe from the lodge, maybe from the cabin. Reacher's pulse stayed steady. 2 against 1, with Ellen as backup. He'd take worse odds. He whispered to her, "Back wall! If it goes bad, run! Keep the notes!" She nodded, her pistol ready, her fear buried deep. Reacher eased the door open, silent, his body low. The men were close, their guns loose, their steps careless. He moved like a ghost, closing the gap in seconds. The first went down with a fist to the jaw, silent and fast. The second turned, But Reacher was faster, his rifle butt cracking the man's skull. They crumpled, out cold. Reacher dragged them inside, tying them with rope from the shed. Ellen watched, her face tight. "They're not stopping," she said. "Vance won't." "Then we stop him," Reacher said, his voice hard. He checked the men's pockets. Cash, a burner phone, a scrap of paper with coordinates. He memorized them. The quarry, no doubt. The phone was locked, but he kept it. Small pieces added up. "We move now," Reacher said, grabbing the satchel and box. "Quarry's our target. We find X-17, end it." Ellen stood, her pistol in hand, her eyes steady. "For Thomas," she said. "For all of them," Reacher replied. The desert's echo was loud now. Screams, smoke, a truth he couldn't unsee. Blackthorn was a lie, and he was its reckoning. They slipped out of the shed, the night their cover. Margrave was a battlefield, and the quarry was its heart. Vance was waiting, Langston's shadow looming, red crescent ready to buy. Reacher didn't care about the odds. He had the notes, the code, and a woman who wouldn't break. Blackthorn was his past, and he'd bury it, no matter the cost. Chapter 11. Enemies in High Places. The night clung to Margrave like a shroud, its silence a thin veil over the town's secrets. Jack Reacher and Ellen Brandt moved through the woods, shadows among shadows, the quarry their target. The satchel hung heavy on Reacher's shoulder, packed with Thomas Brandt's decoded notes, maps, and the USB drive he couldn't yet crack. The folders under his jacket were a constant weight. Their words: Blackthorn, X-17, Senator Langston, Omnicorp. A map to a betrayal that reached higher than he'd imagined. The rifle was in his hands, its metal cold. A tool he didn't love, but needed. Ellen's pistol gleamed faintly, her step steady despite the fear in her eyes. The quarry was a fortress, Vance's stronghold, where X-17 was poised to ship out to Red Crescent. Reacher's mind was a steel trap, holding every piece. The desert test, 27 dead civilians, Thomas Brandt's murder, and his own role as Blackthorn's badge. Langston's name, dropped by the DoD agent, was the new thread. A senator, pulling strings from D.C., protecting a chemical weapon for profit or power. Reacher didn't care why. He cared about stopping it, and that meant hitting the quarry, finding X-17, and burning it to the ground. The shed was behind them. It's tied up. Guards a small victory. The coordinates from their pocket confirmed the quarry, and the burner phone was a lead Reacher would chase later. For now, the mission was simple. Get in, destroy the shipment, get out. Simple didn't mean easy. Vance's crew was armed, the DoD was circling, and Langston's reach was long. Reacher didn't trust anyone, not even Ellen, not fully. She was tough, but Blackthorn broke tougher. They reached the quarry's edge, the chain-link fence glinting under the moon. Reacher crouched, Ellen beside him, her breath shallow but controlled. The gate was guarded. 2 men with rifles there, eyes sharp. Tire tracks scarred the dirt, fresh and deep. Trucks ready to move X-17. A faint hum came from the bunker, machinery or voices, Reacher couldn't tell. The air smelled of dust and diesel, a battlefield waiting to ignite. He studied the fence, spotting the rusted section from before. "Same way in," he whispered to Ellen. "Stay low, follow me." She nodded, her pistol ready. Reacher slid under the fence, the mud cold against his chest, the folders and satchel secure. Ellen followed, silent, her movements clumsy but quick. They moved to a gravel pile, its shadow deep and crouched, watching. The guards hadn't seen them, but the bunker's light flickered, a sign of life inside. Reacher's plan was lean. Find the shipment, sabotage it, and vanish. Fire had worked before, but X-17 was chemical, volatile. He needed to be sure it wouldn't spread, wouldn't repeat the desert's horror. Thomas's notes mentioned a neutralizer, a compound to kill X-17's potency. If it was here, Reacher would find it. If not, he'd improvise. He led Ellen along the quarry's edge, sticking to cover. Crates, machinery, anything to hide them. The bunker was close, its door cracked, voices spilling out. Reacher recognized Vance's rough growl, Kessler's sharp edge. A third voice, smooth and cold, stopped him cold. Not local, not army. Someone new, someone high. Langston's. Clear, the smooth voice said. The deal's set. Red Crescent pays tomorrow, Dubai. X-17 ships tonight. Reacher's blood chilled. Langston was in deep, not just protecting but profiting. The smooth voice was a player, maybe Omnicorp, maybe DC Reacher edged closer, peering through the door's gap. Vance stood at a table, maps and crates around him. Kessler paced, his leg bandaged from Reacher's bullet. The third man was older, suit crisp, his face sharp like a hawk's. Not a soldier, but dangerous, his hands clean but stained with power. "We can't wait," Kessler said, his voice tight. "Reacher's got the notes. He's with the woman. They're here, I know it." "Then find them," the suit said, his tone ice. "Langston wants no loose ends. Reacher, Brandt, the files, gone. X-17's our future, and we don't share." Vestiture nodded, his eyes hard. "Shipments ready. Neutralizers in the crates, just in case. We move at midnight." Reacher's mind locked onto the neutralizer. It was here, the key to killing X-17 without a catastrophe. He signaled Ellen to stay put, his eyes scanning the quarry. Crates were stacked near the bunker, some marked with hazard symbols, others plain. The neutralizer would be separate, protected. He needed to find it fast. He moved to the crates, Ellen covering him, her pistol steady. The guards were distracted, their eyes on the bunker. Reacher pried a crate open, silent, his flashlight low, vials clear and small, labelled N12. The neutralizer, according to Thomas's notes. He grabbed a handful, tucking them into the satchel. Enough to kill a shipment, maybe more. A shout broke the quiet. Kessler, at the bunker door, his gun drawn. "He's here!" he yelled, firing wild. Reacher dove, the bullet sparking off a crate. Ellen fired back, her shots high, but enough to scatter Kessler's men. Reacher rolled, the rifle up, his aim precise. He hit one guard in the leg, another in the shoulder. The quarry erupted, shouts and gunfire tearing the night. "Run!" Reacher barked, pulling Ellen toward the fence. The neutralizer was his, the satchel secure, but the shipment was still in play. He fired as he ran, keeping Vance's crew pinned. The suit was gone, vanished into the bunker, a rat in a storm. Reacher didn't care. He'd find him later. They reached the fence, sliding under, the mud slick under their hands. The quarry was chaos, flames licking up from a stray bullet hitting fuel. Reacher didn't stop. The woods were their cover, the night their friend. Ellen was panting, her face streaked with dirt, but she didn't falter. Reacher respected that. She was in, all the way. They found a hollow, deep and hidden, and crouched, catching their breath. The quarry's glow was faint, its noise fading. Reacher checked the satchel, files intact, notes and folders safe. The USB drive was still a mystery, but the neutralizer was gold. He could stop X-17, but he needed the shipment's location, and that meant going after Vance, or the suit. Ellen's eyes were sharp, her voice low. Who was that man? The one with Vance. Langston's dog, Reacher said, his tone hard. Omnicorp, maybe. He's high, and he's scared. That's good. Scared men talk. She nodded, her pistol still in hand. What now? We find the shipment, Reacher said. Neutralize it, end it. Then we hunt Langston. He's the head, and heads roll. Ellen's face hardened. For Thomas. For all of them, Reacher said. The desert's echo was a roar now. Screams, blood, a truth he couldn't unsee. Blackthorn was a machine, and Langston was its engine. Reacher would break it no matter how high it went. A noise, tires distant but closing. Reacher tensed, the rifle up. Headlights cut through the trees, slow and deliberate. Not Vance's crew. Too clean, too quiet. DOD or worse. Reacher grabbed Ellen, pulling her deeper into the hollow. The car stopped. Doors opening. Voices low. He caught a name, Langston, and his blood went cold. They're here, a voice said, smooth and familiar. The suit from the bunker. Find them. No mistakes. Reacher's jaw clenched. Enemies in high places, and they were close. He had the neutralizer, the notes, and Ellen. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Blackthorn was his fight, and he'd take it to the top, no matter who stood in his way. Chapter 12. The Shipment. The hollow was a shallow grave of roots and shadows, barely hiding Jack Reacher and Ellen Brandt as the headlights cut through the trees. The satchel was heavy with the neutralizer vials, Thomas Brandt's notes, and the USB drive, while the folders under Reacher's jacket pressed hard against his ribs. The rifle was in his hands, its weight a grim anchor. Ellen crouched beside him, her pistol steady, her breath quiet but tense. The voices from the car, led by the smooth-talking suit from the quarry, were close, their words sharp with intent. Langston! Find them! No mistakes! Margrave was a noose, and it was tightening. Reacher's mind was a blade, slicing through the chaos. Blackthorn was a hydra, Vance at the quarry, Langston in D.C., Omnicorp's money, and Red Crescent waiting to buy X-17. The neutralizer vials were his trump card, capable of killing the chemical weapon before it left Margrave. But the shipment was still out there, and the suit's presence meant time was running out. Reacher needed to find it, neutralize it, and break Blackthorn's spine. Langston was the head, but the shipment was the heart. The car's engine idled, its lights sweeping the woods. Reacher counted 3 men, their silhouettes armed and precise. Not Vance's sloppy crew. These were pros, likely Omnicorp or Langston's, private muscle. The suit's voice carried, cold and commanding. Spread out, they're close, Reacher's got the notes. The woman's with him. End this. Reacher's jaw clenched. The suit knew too much, and that made him dangerous. Reacher, signalled Ellen to stay low. His eyes locked on the men. A fight was tempting, but it'd draw more heat, and the quarry was already a furnace. He needed to move to find the shipment before it rolled out. Thomas's notes had mentioned a staging point. Coordinates near Margrave's old airstrip, a mile east. If X-17 was moving tonight, that's where it'd be. He whispered to Ellen, "Airstrip, east. We go now. Quiet." She nodded, her face pale but hard. Reacher led, crawling through the hollow, the mud slick under his hands. The men were fanning out, their boots crunching, but the woods were thick, and Reacher was a ghost. Ellen followed, her movements careful, the pistol ready. The car's lights faded as they slipped deeper into the trees, the night their shield. The airstrip was a relic, its runway cracked and overgrown, used only by smugglers and drifters. Reacher approached from the south. The terrain, rough but familiar. The satchel's weight slowed him, but the neutralizer was worth it. Ellen's breathing was steady now, her fear buried under purpose. Reacher respected that. She was in, no matter the cost. They reached the airstrip's edge, crouching behind a rusted fuel tank. The scene was alive. 2 trucks parked near a hangar, their engines idling, crates stacked beside them. 4 men moved in the dim light, armed, their voices low. Reacher spotted Kessler, his limp clear, barking orders. No Vance, no suit, but the crates were marked with hazard symbols. X-17, no doubt. A small plane waited on the runway, its propellers still, ready to take the shipment to Red Crescent. Reacher's pulse stayed even. This was it, the heart of Blackthorn's revival. He checked the satchel, the neutralizer vials secure. Thomas's note said 1 vial could kill a crate's worth of X-17, rendering it inert. Reacher had 6, enough to wipe the shipment if he could get close. The problem was the men, the guns, and the clock. Midnight was near, and the plane wouldn't wait. He turned to Ellen, his voice a whisper. "Cover me. Stay here. Shoot only if you have to. If I go down, take the vials. Finish it." Her eyes were fierce, her nod sharp. "Don't go down." Reacher's lips twitched, not quite a smile. He moved low and silent, the rifle slung, his hands free for the vials. The hangar's shadow was his cover, the crates his target. The men were distracted, loading the plane, Kessler's shouts masking Reacher's steps. He reached the first crate, its lid loose, and cracked it open. Canisters inside, sleek and deadly. X-17. He uncapped a vial, pouring the neutralizer over them, the liquid hissing faintly. 1 crate down. He moved to the next, then the third, his movements precise, the vials emptying fast. The men were close, their voices sharper now. Kessler turned, his eyes narrowing, sensing something wrong. Reacher ducked, the satchel lighter, 3 vials gone. He needed to hit the plane's cargo, the last of the shipment. But Kessler was in the way. A shout. Kessler, pointing, his gun raised. "He's here!" Bullets tore through the air, sparking off the crates. Reacher dove, rolling behind a stack, his rifle up. He fired once, catching a man in the leg, then another in the shoulder. Ellen's pistol cracked from the fuel tank. her shots wild but enough to scatter the crew. Reacher ran, the satchel bouncing, the last vials his only weapon. He reached the plane, its cargo hatch open, crates inside. He poured 2 vials, the neutralizer soaking the canisters, his hands steady despite the chaos. Kessler was closing, his limp slowing him, his gun blazing. Reacher spun, firing, the bullet grazing Kessler's arm. The man screamed, dropping his weapon, but more men were coming, their shots pinning Reacher. Ellen's voice cut through, sharp and desperate. "Reacher, go!" She was firing, her pistol empty, but buying him seconds. He poured the last vial, the shipment dead, then dove for the hangar's shadow. Bullets chewed the ground, but he was fast, his body a machine. Ellen was at the fuel tank, reloading, her face a mask of grit. Reacher reached her, pulling her into the woods. The airstrip was a storm. Kessler's shouts fading, the plane's propellers starting. Too late, the shipment was useless, X-17, neutralized. Reacher's chest was tight, not from running but from the weight of it. He'd stopped the deal, but Blackthorne wasn't done. Langston, Vance, the suit, they were still out there, and they'd know he'd won this round. They ran, the woods swallowing them, the airstrip's glow a memory. Reacher checked the satchel. Notes, USB drive, folders intact. The neutralizer was gone, its job done. Ellen was panting, her pistol still in hand, her eyes fierce. "Did we get it?" she asked, her voice raw. "Yeah," Reacher said, his tone hard. "It's dead, but they're not." She nodded, her face set. "Langston, he's next." Reacher's jaw clenched. Langston was the head, the man who'd funded Blackthorne, who'd buried Thomas Brandt and 27 civilians. The suit was his dog, Omnicorp his muscle, Red Crescent his buyer. Reacher had stopped the shipment, but the war was far from over. The USB drive was his next move. If he could crack it, it might hold the proof to bring Langston down. A new hideout, a drainage culvert under a forgotten road. Its concrete cold but hidden. Reacher sat, the satchel open, the folders beside him. Ellen watched the entrance, her pistol reloaded, her silence heavy. Reacher opened Thomas's notes, cross-checking the codes. The USB drive was mentioned once, a backup for Blackthorne's core files, names, deals, proof. He needed a computer, and Margrave wasn't safe for that. "We need to leave town," Reacher said, his voice low. "Find a city, crack the drive, expose Langston." Ellen's eyes were hard. "They'll hunt us. Vance, the suits, all Moses. Them. Let them," Reacher said, his tone cold. "I'm not hiding. Blackthorne's a lie, and I'm tearing it down." She nodded, her hand tight on the pistol. The desert's echo was a scream now. Blood. Screams. A truth he'd carry forever. Blackthorne was his past, Langston its present, and Reacher was its end. The culvert was their shelter, but not for long. Margrave was behind them, and the fight was ahead, bigger than ever. Chapter 13. The Road to Atlanta. The drainage culvert was a cold, damp cocoon, its concrete walls muffling the world outside. Jack Reacher sat with his back to the curve, the satchel open beside him, the folders and Thomas Brandt's notes a heavy burden. The rifle rested across his knees, its barrel scratched but ready. Ellen Brandt crouched near the entrance, her pistol in hand, her eyes scanning the dark. Margrave was a furnace behind them. its quarry and airstrip smouldering from Reacher's strike. X-17 was dead, neutralized, but Blackthorn was alive. Langston, Vance, Omnicorp, Red Crescent. The USB drive in the satchel was their next move, a potential key to exposing the senator and ending the conspiracy. But Margrave was too hot, too small. They needed Atlanta, a city big enough to hide, with tech to crack the drive. Reacher's mind was a steel cage, holding every detail. The desert test, 27 civilian deaths, Thomas Brandt's murder, and his own role as Blackthorn's unwitting badge. Langston was the puppet master, funding the project, protecting it from DC's towers. The suit from the quarry was his enforcer, Omnicorp his bankroll, and Red Crescent a buyer who'd never see their prize. Reacher had stopped the shipment, but the war was far from won. The drive held proof, names, deals, maybe Langston's own words. If Reacher could unlock it, he could bring the senator down. Ellen's voice broke the silence, low and tense. "They'll be looking for us. Vance, the suits may be cops. We can't stay here." "We won't," Reacher said, his tone hard. "Atlanta's our shot. Find a computer, crack the drive, get the proof to someone who'll listen." Her eyes narrowed, skeptical but steady. "You trust anyone to listen? After all this?" "No," Reacher admitted, "but proof's a weapon. We use it, or we're running forever." She nodded, her jaw tight. Ellen was in deep, her brother's death a fire that kept her moving. Reacher respected her for it. She wasn't a soldier, but she was a fighter, and that was enough. He packed the satchel, notes, folders, the USB drive secure. The rifle was a risk in a city, but he wasn't leaving it. Margrave's roads would be watched, its edges crawling with Vance's men or Langston's suits. They needed a way out, clean and fast. Reacher knew the type of place. Truck stops, where drifters and haulers mixed, where cash bought silence, and a ride. There was one south of town, a dive called Big Rigs, just off the highway. It was their best shot. "Truck stop," Reacher said, standing. "We hitch a ride, no questions. You good?" Ellen holstered her pistol, her face set. "For Thomas." Reacher led the way, slipping out of the culvert into the pre-dawn chill. The woods were quiet, but Margrave's pulse was loud. Sirens in the distance, the quarry's fire a faint glow. They moved fast, sticking to the tree line, the satchel bouncing against Reacher's side. His arm ached from the graze, but pain was just background noise. The highway was a mile off, the truck stop a beacon in the dark. Big Rigs was a sprawl of neon and diesel fumes, its lot packed with semis and pickups. Reacher scanned it from the shadows, spotting no suits, no cops, just tired men and cheap coffee. He nodded to Ellen, and they walked in, heads down, blending with the crowd. The diner was loud, plates clattering, voices rough. Reacher picked a driver at the counter, big-bearded, alone, his rig's keys on the table. "Heading to Atlanta?" Reacher asked, his tone casual, a 20 in his hand. The driver glanced up, eyes narrow but greedy. "Maybe. You got cash?" "Enough," Reacher said, sliding the bill. "Two of us, no names." The driver pocketed the cash, nodding. "Back lot, Red Kenworth. 10 minutes." Reacher and Ellen waited outside, the rifle hidden under his jacket, the satchel tight. The driver was true to his word, his rig rumbling as they climbed in. Ellen took the back, Reacher the front, his eyes on the road. The driver didn't talk, didn't care, and that was perfect. The highway stretched north, Margrave fading in the rear view, its secrets left behind but not forgotten. Atlanta's skyline loomed by morning, a jagged line of glass and steel. The driver dropped them at a gas station. No questions, no trace. Reacher led Ellen into the city, his instincts sharp. They needed a computer, secure and untraceable. Public libraries were too open. Internet cafes too watched. Reacher knew the kind of place. Shady, cash-only, where nobody asked for ID. A pawn shop downtown, tucked between a bar and a laundromat, fit the bill. The shop was dim, its shelves stuffed with junk and dreams. The clerk, a skinny guy with a goatee, barely looked up. "Computers in the back," he said, taking Reacher's cash. "No cameras, no logs. You break it, you buy it." Reacher nodded, leading Ellen to a cramped room with a dusty PC. The machine was old but functional, its screen flickering as it booted. Reacher plugged in the USB drive, his pulse steady but quick. Ellen watched, her hands tight, her brother's notes on the table beside them. The drive opened, a single folder. Blackthorn-Final. Password protected, no surprise. Reacher tried the cipher from Thomas's notes. K12, Shift 7, Grid 444. He typed Omnicorp, then Langston, then Red Crescent. Nothing. Ellen leaned in, her voice low. "Try Nevada 98, it's where it started." Reacher typed it, the screen flashing. The folder opened, files spilling out. Documents, emails, contracts. Reacher scanned them, his jaw tightening. Langston's name was everywhere, tied to Omnicorp's payments, Red Crescent's deal, and Blackthorn's revival. An email from the senator himself, dated last month, was the smoking gun. X-17 must move. No leaks. Reacher and Brandt are liabilities. Terminate. Ellen's breath caught, her eyes wet but hard. "That's it. Proof." "Yeah," Reacher said, his tone cold. "But proof's only good if it gets out." He copied the files to a blank USB from the pawn shop, his hands steady. The originals stayed on the drive, a backup. He needed to get the data to someone clean, press maybe, or a lawyer who didn't scare easy. But Langston's reach was long, and Atlanta wasn't safe. The suits would be hunting, Vance too, and Margrave's heat would follow. A noise, glass, breaking, voices sharp. Reacher yanked the USB drives, shoving them into the satchel. Ellen grabbed her pistol, her eyes wide. The clerk's voice came through, panicked. "They're here, man! Run!" Reacher didn't hesitate. He kicked open a back door, pulling Ellen into an alley. Footsteps pounded behind them, 3 men in suits, guns drawn. Not DOD, Omnicorp, Langston's private dogs. Reacher fired the rifle, one shot, catching a man's leg. The others ducked, giving Reacher and Ellen a head start. They ran. The city, a maze of concrete and noise. Atlanta was big, but not big enough to hide forever. Reacher's mind raced. The files were his weapon, but he needed a target, someone to break Blackthorn wide open. A name from Thomas's notes flashed. Clara Hensley, Atlanta Journal-Constitution. A reporter, one Thomas had trusted, one who'd listened before he died. "Hensley," Reacher said, his voice hard. "We find her. Give her the files." Ellen nodded, her pistol still out, her face set. "For Thomas?" "For all of them," Reacher said. The desert's scream was a roar. Blood, lies, a truth he'd make the world hear. Blackthorn was Langston's empire, and Reacher was its wrecking ball. The alley stretched ahead, the suits behind, and Atlanta was their battlefield now. Chapter 14. The Reporter's Gambit. Atlanta's alleys were a labyrinth of grit and shadow. The city's pulse a low hum as Jack Reacher and Ellen Brandt ran. The satchel bounced against Reacher's side, heavy with the USB drives, Thomas Brandt's notes, and the folders that held Blackthorn's secrets. The rifle was slung under his jacket, its bulk a risk but a necessity. Ellen's pistol was out, her face pale but fierce, her steps keeping pace despite the weight of fear. The Omnicorp suits were behind them, their footsteps echoing, their guns a promise of death. Margrave was a memory, but its fire followed. Langston, Vance, Blackthorn. Reacher had the proof to burn it all down, and Clara Hensley was his target. The reporter's name was a lifeline, scrawled in Thomas Brandt's notes as someone he'd trusted, someone who'd listened when he tried to expose Blackthorn years ago. If Hensley was still at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, she could break the story. Langston's emails, Omnicorp's deals, Red Crescent's failed buy. The files on the USB were a grenade, and Reacher needed her to pull the pin. But Atlanta was Langston's turf, his influence deep in its veins. Finding Hensley was one thing, keeping her alive was another. Reacher led Ellen through a narrow cut, dodging dumpsters and broken glass. The suits were close, their shouts sharp, but the city was loud, its traffic and horns masking their trail. He spotted a fire escape, rusted but climbable, and pulled Ellen up, their boots clanging softly. They reached a rooftop, the skyline a jagged sprawl under a grey morning sky. Reacher crouched, scanning the alley below. 3 suits, moving fast, their guns low but ready. They hadn't seen the climb, but they'd figure it out soon. "We need Hensley," Reacher said, his voice low, checking the satchel. The USB drives were secure, the folders intact. "You know the Journal-Constitution?" Ellen nodded, catching her breath. "Downtown, near Peachtree. But it's a fortress, security, cameras. If Langston's watching, they'll know we're coming." "Then we're fast," Reacher said, his tone hard. "Get in, get Hensley, get out. The files are our shot, and she's the trigger." Ellen's eyes were steady, her pistol gripped tight. "They killed Thomas for this. We don't fail. We won't," Reacher said. He didn't make promises, but this one was iron. Desert Scream. 27 dead. A test gone wrong. Was his fuel. Blackthorn was Langston's sin, and Reacher was its judge. They moved across rooftops, leaping gaps, the city a maze below. The Journal-Constitution was a mile off, its glass tower a beacon in the morning light. Reacher's plan was lean. Find Hensley, hand over the files, disappear. Langston's reach meant she'd be a target the moment the story broke. But that was her fight. Reacher's was getting her the truth. They dropped to street level in a quiet alley, the newspaper's building looming across the road. Its lobby was sleek, all glass and steel, with security at the desk and cameras in every corner. Reacher didn't like it. Too open, too watched. He scanned the street, spotting a delivery van pulling around back. That was their way in. "Follow me," he whispered, leading Ellen to the loading dock. The van's driver was unloading boxes, distracted. Reacher slipped past, Ellen close, and they ducked into a service entrance. The halls were dim, smelling of ink and coffee, a warren of offices and deadlines. Reacher needed Hensley's desk, and he needed it fast. A janitor's cart blocked the hall, its owner mopping nearby. Reacher approached, his voice low. "Clara Hensley, where's her office?" The janitor, an older man with tired eyes, glanced up. "Third floor, newsroom. But she's not in yet. Comes around noon." Reacher checked his watch. 10:47 a.m. Too long to wait, but they had no choice. He nodded, slipping the man a 10. "Keep it quiet." The janitor pocketed the cash, uninterested. Reacher led Ellen to a stairwell, avoiding elevators and their cameras. The third floor was a buzz of phones and keyboards, the newsroom a chaos of cubicles and screens. Reacher found an empty office, its door unlocked, and pulled Ellen inside. A desk, a computer, a window with a view of the street. They'd wait here, out of sight, until Hensley showed. Ellen sat, her pistol on her lap, her eyes on the door. What if she's not the same? Thomas trusted her, but that was years ago. "Then we find someone else," Reacher said, his tone flat. He opened the satchel, checking the USB drives. The files were their leverage. Langston's emails, Omnicorp's contracts, proof of X-17's revival. Hensley was their best shot. But Reacher didn't trust anyone blindly. He'd watch her, read her, and if she was dirty, he'd know. A noise, outside, footsteps, deliberate. Reacher tensed, the rifle ready, his body against the wall. Ellen raised her pistol, her breath held. The door opened, and a woman stepped in. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, dark hair pulled back. She froze, seeing them, her hand reaching for a phone. "Don't," Reacher said, his voice low, the rifle up but not aimed. "Clara Hensley." She nodded, her eyes flicking between him and Ellen. "Who are you? This is my office." "Reacher," he said, lowering the rifle slightly. "This is Ellen Brandt. We've got something you need to see. Thomas Brandt sent us." Hensley's face changed. A flash of recognition, then caution. "Thomas? He's been dead for years." "I know," Ellen said, her voice hard. "They killed him for Blackthorn. We've got proof, files, emails, everything. Langston's behind it." Hensley's eyes narrowed, her hand dropping from the phone. "Langston! The senator! That's a big name to throw around." "Bigger than you know," Reacher said, pulling the USB drive from the satchel. "This has it all. Blackthorn, X-17, Omnicorp, Red Crescent. Thomas trusted you. We're betting he was right." Hensley hesitated, then nodded, her jaw tight. "Let me see." Reacher handed her the drive, watching her closely. She plugged it into the computer, her fingers quick, her face unreadable. The screen lit up, files opening. Langston's emails, Omnicorp's payments, dates and deals. Hensley's breath caught, her eyes scanning fast. "This is explosive," she said, her voice low. "If it's real, it could bring down half of DC." "It's real," Ellen said, her tone fierce. "Thomas died for it. 27 civilians died for it." Hensley looked at her, then at Reacher, her eyes sharp. "You're in deep, aren't you? Langston's not just a name. He's got people everywhere. If I run this, they'll come for me too. Then run it loud, Reacher said, his tone cold. Make it too big to bury. We'll handle the rest. Hensley nodded, copying the files to her system, her hands steady. I've got contacts. FBI, not local, clean. I'll get this to them too, but you need to disappear now. Reacher was about to reply when a shout came from the newsroom. Glass shattering, voices barking, orders. He spun, the rifle up, his body shielding Ellen. Hensley froze, her eyes wide. They're here, she whispered. Reacher peered through the office window. 4 men, suits, moving through the newsroom, guns low but clear. Omnicorp, or Langston's, private crew. They'd tracked them, maybe from the pawn shop, maybe from Margrave. Reacher's jaw clenched. The files were out, but the fight wasn't. Back door, he said, pulling Ellen and Hensley toward a service exit. The reporter grabbed her laptop, the USB drive still in it. They hit the stairs, footsteps pounding behind them. Reacher led, the rifle ready, his mind a steel trap. The files were with Hensley. The truth was out. But Langston's dogs were close, and Atlanta was their hunting ground. They burst into an alley, the city's noise a roar. Reacher scanned for cover. A van, a dumpster, anything. The suits were at the door, their guns raised. He fired once, a warning shot, scattering them. Run, he barked, pushing Ellen and Hensley ahead. The alley twisted, leading to a crowded street. Reacher blended them into the foot traffic, his eyes scanning for tails. Hensley was shaken but moving, her laptop clutched tight. Ellen's pistol was hidden, her face set. The files were their victory, but Langston was their war. Reacher would find him, break him, and end Blackthorn for good. The desert's truth, blood, lies, 27 dead, was his fire, and he'd burn it all down.